What's up, everyone? Tonight, we're diving into one of history's most fascinating contradictions, the story of Roman women and intimacy, where freedom and oppression dance together in ways that would make your head spin faster than a chariot wheel. You're about to discover a world where the most powerful women in the empire were also the most restricted, where marriage was political theater, and where love existed in the shadows of law and tradition. So before you get comfortable, like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and current time. I love seeing where in the world you're joining me for these ancient adventures. Now turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for that gentle background sound, and let's begin our journey tonight. You find yourself standing in the heart of ancient Rome, where the morning sun casts long shadows across the forum's marble columns. The air carries the scent of burning incense and the distant sound of sandaled feet on stone. Here, in the most sacred precinct of the city, you're about to witness one of history's greatest paradoxes. Women who wielded enormous religious power while being bound by restrictions that would make a medieval nun look liberated. The Vestal Virgins approach in their pristine white robes, their faces serene, but their eyes carrying the weight of impossible expectations. These 6 women, chosen as children from Rome's most elite families, represent the ultimate contradiction of Roman feminine power. They're the only women in the empire who answer to no man. Not father, not husband, not emperor. Yet they've purchased this freedom with the most intimate sacrifice imaginable. Their sexuality, their capacity for romantic love, their ability to bear children and continue their family lines. You watch as the eldest Vestal, perhaps 30 years old with graying hair peeking from beneath her white veil, performs the daily ritual of tending the sacred flame. Her movements are precise, practiced, reverent. This fire has burned continuously for over 500 years, and its maintenance falls entirely to these women. If it dies, Rome itself might fall, or so the people believe. The responsibility is crushing, yet grants them something no other Roman woman possesses: complete autonomy over their bodies, their time, their decisions. The morning ritual unfolds with hypnotic precision. You smell the rich aroma of sacred oils, hear the soft whisper of prayers in archaic Latin, feel the heat radiating from the eternal flame. These women live in a world apart, in the luxurious house of the Vestals, where they dine on the finest foods, with the costliest fabrics, and command respect that even senators must acknowledge. They can own property, make wills, and free slaves with a gesture. In a society where women are perpetually under male guardianship, the Vestals stand as islands of independence. But you also sense the terrible price of this freedom. The youngest Vestal, barely 10 years old, stands slightly apart from the others, her childhood sacrificed to divine service. She'll spend the next 30 years, maintaining her virginity while surrounded by the most sexually charged city in the ancient world. One historian calculated that a Vestal's chances of surviving her full term of service without breaking her vow of chastity were roughly the same as your chances of surviving a weekend in ancient Rome without catching something unpleasant. The historical record reveals that Rome's relationship with its Vestals was deeply neurotic. These women were simultaneously revered and suspected, protected and persecuted. When disasters struck, military defeats, plagues, famines, the Vestals often became convenient scapegoats. The slightest suspicion of unchastity could result in a trial where the accused Vestal was literally buried alive, sealed in an underground chamber with a small amount of food and water, left to die in darkness. The Romans called this giving her to the earth, which sounds poetic until you realize it was a death sentence wrapped in religious euphemism. Yet historians still debate whether the Vestals truly represented female empowerment or elaborate imprisonment. Some scholars argue that these women exercised genuine political influence, intervening in legal cases, negotiating with foreign diplomats, and even occasionally defying emperors. Others suggest that their power was largely ceremonial, a kind of religious theater that allowed Rome to worship feminine divinity while keeping actual women firmly subordinated. You observe the curious ritual of the Vestal's daily interactions with the city. When they venture outside their sanctuary, crowds part respectfully. Citizens seek their blessing, touch their robes for luck, bring them gifts and petitions. Yet this reverence carries an undercurrent of fear. The Vestal's purity is so essential to Rome's survival that they're monitored constantly, their every action scrutinized for signs of corruption. They're simultaneously too sacred to touch and too dangerous to trust completely. The afternoon brings a different kind of ceremony. A young woman, perhaps 17, approaches the Vestal precinct accompanied by her family. She's been chosen to replace a retiring Vestal, and you witness the strange ritual of her transformation. Her hair is cut short, her childhood toy surrendered, her previous life symbolically burned away. She's not quite being murdered, but she's definitely being erased, reconstructed as something between woman and goddess, human and symbol. The economic realities of Vestal service reveal another layer of complexity. These women receive substantial salaries, own valuable properties, and accumulate wealth that would make merchants envious. After 30 years of service, they're free to leave, marry, and reclaim normal life, though few do. The world outside their sanctuary has moved on without them, and the transition from sacred virgin to ordinary wife proves nearly impossible for most. It's rather like being a celebrity who's been frozen in time, then suddenly released into a world where everyone's forgotten why you were famous in the first place. As evening approaches, you witness the Vestal's private moments away from public scrutiny. They're intelligent, educated women who correspond with philosophers, patronize artists, and engage in theological debates. Some write poetry, others study astronomy. Their enforced celibacy has created space for intellectual pursuits that married women rarely enjoy. Yet you also sense their profound loneliness, their isolation from the fundamental human experiences of romantic love, sexual intimacy, and motherhood. The final ceremony of the day involves the preparation of sacred salt, a task that seems almost comically mundane given the mystical weight attached to it. Yet this ritual encapsulates the Vestal paradox perfectly. They're performing essential religious duties that maintain cosmic order, wielding power that transcends ordinary human authority. Simultaneously, they're trapped in roles that deny them the most basic human connections, sacrificing their individual desires for collective security. The darkness settles over the forum, and the eternal flame flickers in its sacred hearth. You realize that the Vestals represent something deeply unsettling about Roman attitudes toward women and power. Rome could imagine women as divinely powerful, but only if they renounced their humanity. They could trust women with the empire's survival, but only if those women agreed to remain forever outside the cycles of desire, love, and reproduction that defined ordinary life. The sacred and the profane existed in constant tension within these white-robed figures, creating a form of feminine authority that was simultaneously absolute and utterly constrained. They were free in ways that no other Roman women could imagine, yet bound by chains that no Roman man would ever have accepted. In their paradoxical existence, you glimpse the broader contradictions that would define Roman women's relationship with intimacy, power, and freedom for centuries to come. You step from the sacred precinct into the bustling streets of Rome, where the morning air carries the scent of fresh bread and the distant sound of wedding preparations. Today, you're about to witness something that would make modern dating apps look refreshingly honest: a Roman marriage negotiation, where love is optional, but political advantage is absolutely essential. The house you enter belongs to Senator Marcus Aurelius Maximus, whose 14-year-old daughter Claudia is about to become a commodity in the most sophisticated marriage market the ancient world has ever seen. You smell the rich aroma of imported spices wafting from the kitchen, hear the soft rustle of silk being arranged for the bride's display, and feel the tension that comes when two families are about to merge their fortunes, reputations, and future political prospects. Claudia sits motionless as servants arrange her hair into an elaborate style that will take 3 hours to complete. Her face reveals nothing. She's been trained since childhood to mask her emotions, to become a perfect vessel for her family's ambitions. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes of this kind of scrutiny, but Roman girls learn early that their bodies, their futures, and their capacity for affection are resources to be managed by wiser heads than their own. The prospective groom arrives with his father, and you witness the delicate dance of Roman courtship. Young Marcus Flavius, barely 16 himself, examines Claudia with the clinical attention of someone inspecting a racehorse. She's evaluated for her health, her breeding potential, her family connections, and her ability to manage a household that might eventually include hundreds of slaves, multiple properties, and complex business interests. Romance, if it develops, will be a pleasant bonus, but it's certainly not a requirement. Historians still debate whether these arranged marriages were fundamentally oppressive or represented a form of female empowerment through family alliance. Some scholars argue that Roman women wielded considerable influence through strategic marriages, using their positions to advance their natal family's interests and build networks of female solidarity. Others suggest that the system reduced women to breeding stock, valuable only for their ability to produce legitimate heirs and maintain family honor. The negotiation begins in earnest as the fathers discuss dowry arrangements. Claudia's father offers a substantial sum, enough to purchase a small villa, plus jewelry, household goods, and the promise of future political support. The groom's family counters with details about the marriage settlement, the widow's portion Claudia will receive if her husband dies, and the legal protections that will govern her property rights. It's less like a wedding arrangement and more like a corporate merger, complete with lawyers, witnesses, and enough paperwork to choke a tax collector. You observe the curious little-known fact that Roman marriage required no religious ceremony, no state approval, and no formal legal documentation. Two people simply had to agree to be married, live together, and present themselves as husband and wife to their community. The elaborate negotiations you're witnessing are purely about money, property, and social positioning. The actual marriage could happen with a handshake and a shared meal. But social expectations demand theater, and Roman families deliver spectacle that would make Hollywood producers weep with envy. The engagement ceremony unfolds with carefully choreographed precision. Rings are exchanged, not on the left hand as modern couples do, but on the right, closer to the heart according to Roman medical theory. The bride receives gifts that seem generous until you realize they're calculated investments in her future loyalty and productivity. The months between engagement and wedding become a complex period of preparation and evaluation. Claudia learns the intricate arts of household management, studies the genealogies of her new family, and practices the social skills that will help her navigate the treacherous waters of Roman high society. She's also quietly assessed by her future mother-in-law, who holds veto power over the marriage if the girl proves unsuitable for the family's needs. You witness the gradual transformation of a child into a political instrument. Claudia's natural spontaneity slowly disappears, replaced by the calculated grace of a woman who understands that her every gesture will be interpreted, judged, and used to advance or damage her family's interests. She learns to smile without meaning it, to express affection on command, and to find satisfaction in duties rather than desires. The wedding day arrives with all the pomp and circumstance that Roman society can muster. The bride's house fills with relatives, friends, and political allies, all gathered to witness the transfer of a valuable asset from one family to another. The air thrums with conversation, music, and the kind of forced cheerfulness that accompanies events where everyone's pretending to be happier than they actually are. The ceremony itself reveals the underlying economics of Roman marriage. The bride wears a white tunic and an orange veil, colors that symbolize purity and fertility, her primary value in the transaction. Her hair is arranged with a spear, a reminder that marriage is a form of ritualized capture, a peaceful version of the bride theft that ancient societies practiced more literally. The symbolism is about as subtle as a gladiator's sword, but everyone politely pretends not to notice. The wedding feast becomes a display of wealth, taste, and political connections. You taste exotic delicacies imported from the far corners of the empire, watch carefully choreographed entertainment, and observe the intricate social dynamics that determine who sits where, who speaks when, and who receives the honor of offering toasts to the new couple. It's less a celebration of love and more a diplomatic reception with better wine. But beneath the surface pageantry, you glimpse moments of genuine human connection. The bride and groom steal brief glances at each other, perhaps finding something appealing in their arranged partnership. The mothers exchange knowing looks that suggest shared understanding of the challenges ahead. Even in this calculated environment, people find ways to create authentic relationships, to transform duty into something resembling affection. The evening's climax comes with the bride's removal to her new home, a procession that combines celebration with symbolism so heavy-handed it would make a medieval allegory look subtle. Claudia is literally carried across the threshold, surrendering her childhood identity and embracing her new role as wife, potential mother, and junior partner in a complex family enterprise. As the celebration winds down, you reflect on the strange mixture of restriction and opportunity that defined Roman marriage. These unions were undeniably limiting for women, reducing them to valuable objects in masculine political games. Yet they also created networks of female influence, provided economic security, and offered paths to social advancement that would have been impossible for women operating independently. The newly married couple retires to their chambers, where they'll begin the delicate process of transforming a business arrangement into something resembling a functional partnership. Some Roman marriages evolved into genuine love affairs. Others remained cordial collaborations, and many became battlegrounds where spouses waged subtle warfare through household management, child rearing, and social manipulation. You realize that Roman marriage was simultaneously more honest and more cynical than modern romantic ideals. These people acknowledged that partnership required more than passion. It demanded compatible goals, shared values, and complementary skills. They understood that love could grow from respect and mutual dependence, even when it didn't begin with attraction and chemistry. The night settles over Rome, and you leave the newlyweds to negotiate their future together, armed with nothing but social expectations, family pressure, and the faint hope that duty might somehow transform into something warmer. Their marriage will be judged not by happiness, but by productivity. Children born, alliances maintained, wealth accumulated, and honor preserved. It's a system that would drive modern couples to therapy, but it somehow managed to hold Roman society together for centuries. You slip through the heavy wooden door of a Roman villa just as dawn breaks over the Seven Hills, entering a world where reality and idealization dance together like shadows on marble walls. The air carries the scent of burning olive oil from the kitchen lamps and the subtle perfume of rose petals scattered across polished floors. Here, you're about to discover the gap between what Romans claimed their wives should be and what these women actually accomplished when no one was watching too closely. The household goddess you encounter first is Livia Drusilla, not the Empress, but a senator's wife whose daily routine would make a modern CEO weep with exhaustion. She moves through her domain with the practiced efficiency of someone managing what amounts to a small corporation, her silk stola rustling softly against the marble as she inspects everything from the kitchen stores to the children's lessons. You probably wouldn't last an hour trying to coordinate the schedules of 60 household slaves, but Roman matrons like Livia make it look as effortless as breathing. The morning begins with the ritual of morning salutations, where clients and dependents gather in the villa's atrium to pay their respects. You watch Livia receive petitions, settle disputes, and dispense small favors with the diplomatic skill of a seasoned politician. Officially, she's just the senator's wife, maintaining his household while he handles the important business of governance. Unofficially, she's building networks, gathering intelligence, and wielding influence that would make lobbyists jealous. The idealized Roman matron, as described in literature and law, was supposed to be a paragon of virtue called the univira, a woman who married once and remained faithful until death. She was expected to be modest, fertile, skilled in woolworking and devoted entirely to her husband's welfare and her children's upbringing. The reality, as you observe Livia's morning routine, is infinitely more complex and considerably more impressive. You follow her to the household's textile workshop, where the famous Roman emphasis on woolworking reveals itself as something far more sophisticated than mere domestic drudgery. Livia examines the quality of thread, discusses dye techniques with her slaves, and reviews the account for cloth production with the precision of a modern textile executive. The spinning and weaving that symbolized feminine virtue also generated substantial income and provided employment for dozens of people. Historians still debate whether the cult of the ideal matron represented genuine respect for women's contributions or a clever way of disguising female labor as moral decoration. Some scholars argue that by praising women's domestic skills, Roman society acknowledged their economic importance while keeping them confined to the private sphere. Others suggest that the home-based economy gave women real power over substantial resources and complex social networks. The peculiar little-known fact emerges as you watch Livia conduct the morning's business. Roman law technically required adult women to have male guardians, but in practice, many matrons operated with virtual independence. They controlled their dowries, managed household finances, and made decisions that affected dozens of lives. The legal fiction of male oversight persisted, but the reality was often quite different. The household's morning religious observances reveal another layer of female authority. Livia leads the slaves and family members in prayers to the household gods, her voice carrying the weight of spiritual responsibility. She maintains the family's sacred objects, oversees religious festivals, and serves as the primary intermediary between her household and the divine. In a society where religion and politics were inseparable, this role carried real influence. You observe the morning's educational activities, where Livia supervises not only her own children's lessons, but also the training of young slaves who will eventually manage other households. She's essentially running a finishing school, teaching reading, writing, mathematics, and the complex social skills necessary for success in Roman society. Her influence extends far beyond her immediate family, shaping the next generation of elite women across the empire. The marketplace expedition that follows lunch reveals the economic power hidden beneath the matron's modest exterior. Livia negotiates with merchants, inspects goods, and makes purchasing decisions that affect her household's budget and social standing. She's essentially a procurement executive, managing supply chains that stretch across the Mediterranean. The vendors treat her with the respect accorded to a valued customer whose business can make or break their enterprises. The afternoon brings a stream of visitors, other matrons, their daughters, female relatives, and occasionally male business associates who recognize Livia's authority in household matters. You witness the informal networks that connected elite Roman women, relationships that facilitated everything from marriage negotiations to business partnerships. These social calls aren't mere pleasantries. They're strategic meetings where information is exchanged, alliances are formed, and influence is wielded. The most revealing moment comes when Livia meets with her husband's freedman accountant to review the family's financial situation. She demonstrates detailed knowledge of property values, investment returns, and household expenses, offering suggestions that the accountant receives with respectful attention. Legally, she might be under her husband's authority, but practically, she's a full partner in managing the family's wealth. The evening's entertainment preparation showcases another aspect of the matron's hidden power. Livia oversees the arrangement of a dinner party that will host 20 guests, coordinating everything from menu planning to seating arrangements. Each detail reflects careful calculation: which wines to serve, which slaves to use as servers, which topics of conversation to encourage. She's essentially staging a political event disguised as social entertainment. As darkness falls, you watch Livia conduct the household's evening rituals. She inspects the locks, reviews the next day's schedule with her chief steward, and checks on the children's progress with their tutors. Her authority extends into every corner of the villa, touching every aspect of dozens of lives. She's simultaneously mother, employer, teacher, spiritual leader, and executive manager. The bedtime routine reveals the most intimate aspect of the matron's role. Livia helps her youngest daughter prepare for sleep, braiding her hair and sharing stories that transmit family history and moral lessons. This quiet moment of maternal connection represents the emotional core of the Roman household, the personal relationship that gives meaning to all the public roles and responsibilities. You realize that the Roman matron existed in a strange space between idealization and reality, between restriction and authority. Society praised her domestic virtues while depending on her executive skills, celebrated her modesty while relying on her strategic thinking, and emphasized her subordination while granting her substantial autonomy. She was simultaneously the most constrained and most powerful woman in Roman society. The sleeping villa holds the accumulated achievements of the day: meals prepared, accounts balanced, children educated, religious duties fulfilled, social networks maintained, and household crises resolved. The idealized matron of Roman literature was a comforting fiction, but the real matrons like Livia were something far more impressive. Skilled executives managing complex enterprises while maintaining the pretense of simple domestic virtue. As you drift towards sleep yourself, you reflect on the curious way Roman society created space for female authority while officially denying its existence. The matron's power was real but invisible, acknowledged but unofficial, celebrated but carefully contained. She ruled her domain with efficiency and skill, but always within the comfortable fiction that she was simply fulfilling her natural feminine role. You step into the cool marble halls of the Basilica Julia just as the morning sun slants through its towering columns, casting long shadows across the floor where Roman legal drama unfolds with all the subtlety of a soap opera. The air carries the scent of parchment and ink, mingled with the nervous perspiration of litigants whose lives are about to change forever. Here, you're about to witness something that would make medieval European women weep with envy. Roman wives exercising legal powers that wouldn't return to Western civilization for over 1,000 years. The case before you involves Cornelia Maxima, a woman whose marriage has become so unbearable that she's decided to do something revolutionary. End it. She sits with remarkable composure as her advocate presents her petition for divorce, her silk stola arranged with the careful precision of someone who knows that every gesture will be scrutinized, analyzed, and probably gossiped about at dinner parties for months to come. You probably wouldn't have the courage to dissolve a marriage in front of half the Roman elite, but Cornelia treats the proceeding with the casual confidence of someone exercising a well-established right. The mainstream historical fact that emerges immediately is startling. Roman women could initiate divorce simply by declaring their intention to end the marriage and removing themselves from their husband's household. No elaborate legal proceedings, no religious annulments, no requirement to prove fault or misconduct. The marriage that required months of negotiation and elaborate ceremony could be dissolved with what amounted to a formal declaration of independence. The magistrate reviews Cornelia's case with the practiced efficiency of someone who handles several divorces before lunch. Her husband, Marcus Brutus Flavianus, sits across the chamber looking like a man who's just discovered that his prized racehorse has decided to find a new stable. The couple's financial arrangements must be untangled, custody of children determined, and property restored to its original owners. It's less like a dramatic legal battle and more like an accountant's nightmare with togas. Historians still debate whether Roman divorce law represented genuine female empowerment or simply reflected the practical needs of a society where marriage was primarily an economic arrangement. Some scholars argue that easy divorce gave women real leverage in negotiations with difficult husbands, allowing them to escape truly intolerable situations. Others suggest that the system primarily benefited men, who could discard wives who failed to produce heirs or whose families lost political influence. The little-known curiosity that emerges during the proceedings is that Roman divorce was so common among the elite that some women married and divorced multiple times, accumulating wealth, social connections, and legal experience with each union. Cornelia herself is ending her third marriage. having outlived one husband and divorced another for what the court records delicately describe as irreconcilable differences regarding household management. She's essentially become a serial entrepreneur in the marriage market. You observe the fascinating ritual of property restoration that accompanies Roman divorce. Cornelia's dowry must be returned in full, along with any gifts she received during the marriage and any property she inherited while married. The process requires detailed accounting that would impress modern forensic accountants. Every piece of jewelry, every slave, every investment must be cataloged and restored to its proper owner. The legal advocate presenting Cornelia's case is a master of euphemism, describing marital discord in language so polite it could make a tax audit sound romantic. The husband's excessive fondness for wine becomes differences in social preferences. His violent temper transforms into incompatible approaches to conflict resolution. The wife's refusal to tolerate his misconduct becomes irreconcilable philosophical differences regarding domestic harmony. The most revealing aspect of the proceedings is how matter-of-factly everyone treats the dissolution. There's no moral outrage, no religious condemnation, no suggestion that divorce represents social catastrophe. The magistrate processes the paperwork with the same efficiency he might apply to a property transfer or a business partnership dissolution. Marriage, in the Roman legal system, is essentially a contract that either party can terminate. The children's custody arrangements reveal another surprising aspect of Roman divorce law. While fathers technically held absolute authority over their offspring, practical arrangements often granted mothers substantial access and influence. Cornelia negotiates visitation rights, educational responsibilities, and financial support with the precision of a modern family court attorney. Her maternal rights might be limited legally, but they're acknowledged practically. The financial settlements prove particularly complex. Cornelia entered the marriage with a substantial dowry, accumulated additional property during the union, and now claims compensation for household improvements she funded personally. The accounting requires testimony from slaves, examination of written records, and evaluation of property that's changed value during the marriage. It's basically ancient divorce court, complete with disputed assets and competing claims. You witness the social dynamics surrounding the divorce as other elite women gather to observe the proceedings. They're not just spectators, they're students learning how to navigate the legal system should they ever need to exercise similar rights. The courthouse becomes an informal classroom where women share strategies, recommend advocates, and exchange warnings about potential pitfalls. The afternoon brings testimony about the marriage's breakdown, presented in language so diplomatically vague it could describe anything from mild disagreement to attempted murder. Roman law didn't require specific grounds for divorce, but social expectations demanded some explanation for the dissolution. The witnesses offer carefully crafted accounts that satisfy legal requirements while preserving everyone's reputation. The most intriguing moment comes when Cornelia's husband attempts to contest the divorce by arguing that his wife lacks the legal capacity to make such decisions independently. The magistrate's response is swift and decisive. Adult Roman women, regardless of their theoretical subjection to male guardianship, possess full authority to terminate marriages. It's a legal precedent that wouldn't be matched in most of Europe until the 20th century. The settlement negotiations reveal the economic realities underlying Roman marriage and divorce. Cornelia's financial independence depends partly on her dowry, partly on property she inherited from previous marriages, and partly on investments she made during her current union. She's accumulated enough wealth to live comfortably without remarrying, though social pressure and economic opportunity will probably lead her to the altar again within a year or two. As the proceedings conclude, you realize that Roman divorce law created a strange form of female autonomy within a patriarchal system. Women couldn't vote, hold office, or pursue most careers, but they could end marriages that no longer serve their interests. This legal freedom provided leverage in domestic negotiations and offered escape routes from truly impossible situations. The evening finds Cornelia packing her belongings and preparing to leave her husband's house for the last time. She moves with the efficient grace of someone who's done this before, selecting items that belong to her personally while leaving behind anything that might prompt future legal disputes. Her slaves load carts with clothes, jewelry, personal slaves, and household goods that represent her financial independence. The night settles over Rome as Cornelia establishes herself in a rented villa, ready to begin her life as a divorcee for the third time. Tomorrow, she'll receive visitors congratulating her on her freedom, marriage brokers proposing new alliances, and family members offering advice about her future. The legal system has granted her something remarkable: the right to reinvent herself, to escape the consequences of poor marital choices, and to pursue happiness through serial monogamy. You drift towards sleep, reflecting on the paradox of Roman divorce law, which granted women extraordinary legal rights while maintaining the fiction of their social subordination. These women could dissolve marriages with remarkable ease, but they couldn't imagine lives that didn't revolve around marriage, motherhood, and household management. Freedom, in the Roman context, meant the right to choose your chains rather than the opportunity to live without them entirely. You slip through the shadowed corridors of a Roman villa, just as the afternoon heat begins to fade, following whispered rumors and carefully concealed glances toward a world where passion and peril dance together like lovers on the edge of a precipice. The air carries the subtle scent of imported perfumes and the barely audible rustle of silk against marble. Where secrets are currency and desire is the most dangerous luxury of all. Here, you're about to discover how Roman women navigated the treacherous waters of forbidden love, where a stolen kiss could cost a fortune and a love letter might literally be a death sentence. The woman you encounter first moves with the calculated grace of someone who has learned to conduct revolution in whispers. Julia Tertia glides through her husband's house like a ghost with excellent fashion sense, her movements betraying nothing of the elaborate deception she's orchestrating. She's expecting a visitor who definitely isn't on her husband's approved guest list, and you probably wouldn't have the nerves to conduct an illicit affair under the same roof where your spouse counts his money and plans your children's futures. The mainstream historical fact that emerges immediately is both shocking and oddly liberating. Roman law treated adultery as a serious crime, but only when committed by married women. Men could cavort with slaves, prostitutes, and unmarried women without legal consequence, while their wives faced potential exile, financial ruin, or even death for similar behavior. It's the kind of double standard that would make modern feminists spontaneously combust, but Roman women developed remarkably creative ways to work around these restrictions. The afternoon's clandestine meeting unfolds with the precision of a military operation. Julia's lover arrives disguised as a client seeking her husband's legal services, his toga arranged to suggest respectability, while his eyes burn with the kind of intensity that suggests respectability is the last thing on his mind. The household slaves have been carefully positioned, some sent on errands, others paid for their discretion, and a few trusted with the kind of secrets that could destroy entire families. Historians still debate whether extramarital affairs represented genuine rebellion against patriarchal oppression or simply reflected the natural human tendency to pursue forbidden pleasures regardless of social consequences. Some scholars argue that adultery gave women a form of emotional and physical autonomy otherwise denied to them, allowing them to choose their own partners and explore their desires. Others suggest that these relationships simply created new forms of dependency and vulnerability. The little-known curiosity that emerges as you observe a lover's reunion is that Roman women developed an elaborate system of coded communication for conducting affairs. Jewelry arrangements conveyed messages, flower selections indicated availability, and even the way a woman arranged her hair could signal romantic interest or warn of danger. The villa's garden becomes a complex signaling system where every rose placement and fountain coin carries meaning. You witness the emotional intensity of a relationship that exists entirely in stolen moments. Julia and her lover, Marcus Gaius Antonius, embrace with the desperate hunger of people who know their time is measured in heartbeats rather than hours. Their conversation reveals months of careful planning, secret letters passed through trusted intermediaries, and the constant fear of discovery that adds both excitement and terror to their connection. The physical space of the affair reflects the constraints under which these relationships operated. The lovers meet in Julia's private study, a room theoretically off-limits to casual visitors, but accessible through a network of corridors that allow discreet arrival and departure. Every surface has been arranged to facilitate quick concealment of evidence. Letters hidden in false-bottom jewelry boxes, gifts disguised as religious offerings, and meeting times coordinated with her husband's predictable schedule. The economic realities of Roman adultery prove particularly complex. Julia maintains her affair partly through careful management of her household budget, redirecting funds meant for domestic expenses toward gifts, bribes, and the elaborate logistics of secret meetings. She's essentially embezzling from her own marriage to finance her emotional independence, a practice that would make forensic accountants weep with professional admiration. The conversation between the lovers reveals the psychological toll of conducting romance under constant threat of exposure. They discuss contingency plans, emergency escape routes, and the coded language they'll use if their relationship is discovered. Marcus has prepared exile papers. Julia has secured financial assets her husband can't access, and both have identified allies who might provide protection if their affair becomes public knowledge. The most revealing moment comes when Julia describes the subtle warfare she wages against her husband's authority through her infidelity. Each secret meeting represents a small victory over the legal system that reduces her to property. Each stolen kiss a rebellion against the social order that denies her choice in romantic partners. The affair isn't just about passion. It's about reclaiming agency in a world designed to eliminate female autonomy. The afternoon's crisis arrives when unexpected visitors force the lovers to activate their emergency protocols. Marcus transforms from passionate lover to respectable client in seconds, producing legal documents and assuming the demeanor of someone discussing property transactions rather than planning romantic escapes. Julia shifts into the role of dutiful hostess, her performance so convincing that even you begin to doubt what you witnessed moments earlier. The social dynamics surrounding Roman adultery reveal the complex networks of female complicity and competition that characterized elite society. Julia's affair depends on the silence of other women who have their own secrets to protect, the loyalty of slaves who understand that discretion ensures their security, and the calculated indifference of family members who prefer willful ignorance to explosive confrontations. The evening brings the delicate ritual of separation, as the lovers prepare to return to their official lives of duty, obligation, and carefully maintained pretense. Their parting carries the weight of uncertainty. They don't know when they'll meet again, whether their secret will survive another day, or if their next encounter will be their last. The intensity of forbidden love is matched only by its fundamental instability. You observe the elaborate process Julia undertakes to erase evidence of the afternoon's activities. Letters are burned, gifts are hidden, and traces of masculine cologne are eliminated through careful attention to detail that would impress crime scene investigators. Her transformation back into the dutiful wife is so complete that you begin to understand how Roman women managed to conduct entire secret lives within their officially supervised existences. The night finds Julia lying beside her sleeping husband, her mind replaying the afternoon's stolen moments while her body maintains the perfect stillness of someone who has learned to dream silently. The contrast between her public role and private desires creates a tension that defines her existence. She's simultaneously the most constrained and most rebellious woman in her social circle. As darkness settles over the villa, you reflect on the strange courage required to pursue forbidden love in a society where discovery could mean social death, financial ruin, or actual execution. These women risked everything for moments of genuine connection, choosing passion over security and autonomy over survival. Their affairs represented acts of rebellion so subtle that even they might not have recognized their own revolutionary courage. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the eternal tension between duty and desire, between social expectations and personal fulfillment. Roman women who pursued forbidden love were simultaneously selfish and heroic, reckless and calculating, victims and rebels. Their secret affairs illuminate the human cost of societies that attempt to regulate intimate emotions, revealing the lengths to which people will go to claim even small portions of emotional freedom. You descend into the labyrinthine streets below the Palatine Hill, where the evening mist carries the scent of burning incense, mixed with something far more earthy and immediate. The narrow alleys pulse with a different kind of energy here, where painted walls advertise services in colorful Latin that would make a senator blush, and doorways reveal glimpses of a world that operates by entirely different rules. You're entering the domain of Rome's most paradoxical inhabitants, women who sold their bodies but owned their choices, who were simultaneously despised and indispensable, who enjoyed freedoms that respectable wives could only dream about. The woman you encounter first moves through her domain with the confident stride of someone who has learned to transform society's contempt into cold, hard currency. Claudia Felix operates one of Rome's most successful brothels, her silk stola dyed in the rich purple that announces both wealth and questionable respectability. She greets clients with the practiced charm of someone who has mastered the art of selling fantasy while protecting her own reality. You probably wouldn't survive a day in her business, but she's turned what others consider degradation into a path toward genuine independence. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe her establishment is surprisingly liberating. Roman prostitutes enjoyed legal rights that married women couldn't access. They could own property, conduct business, appear in court as witnesses, and live without male guardianship. The very work that marked them as social outcasts also granted them economic autonomy that respectable matrons envied from behind their carefully maintained facades. The brothel's interior reveals a world of calculated luxury designed to transport clients from the harsh realities of Roman politics into realms of pure sensual pleasure. Frescoed walls depict scenes that would make modern censors reach for their editing tools, while soft music drifts from hidden alcoves where skilled musicians create soundtracks for intimacy. The air carries the mingled sense of expensive perfumes, burning oils, and the indefinable musk of human desire temporarily satisfied. Historians still debate whether Roman prostitution represented genuine female agency or simply reflected society's need to provide sexual outlets while maintaining the fiction of feminine purity. Some scholars argue that sex work gave women unprecedented economic independence and social mobility, allowing them to accumulate wealth and choose their own destinies. Others suggest that the system simply created new forms of exploitation disguised as liberation. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you observe the evening's operations is that Roman courtesans developed sophisticated business networks that rivaled those of merchants and politicians. They shared information about clients, coordinated pricing strategies, and created mutual support systems that provided both financial security and physical protection. These women essentially invented the first professional service guilds operated entirely by and for women. You witness the complex social dynamics that govern interactions between courtesans and their clients. The most successful women, like Claudia, develop long-term relationships with wealthy patrons who provide regular income in exchange for exclusive access and emotional intimacy. These arrangements blur the lines between prostitution and concubinage, creating partnerships that sometimes last for years and occasionally evolve into genuine affection. The economic realities of the courtesan's life prove remarkably sophisticated. Claudia maintains detailed accounts of her earnings, expenses, and investments with the precision of a modern financial planner. She owns property in 3 cities, lends money at competitive interest rates, and has diversified her portfolio to include textile manufacturing and wine importing. Her body might be her primary asset, but her mind has transformed that asset into genuine wealth. The evening's clientele reveals the hypocritical nature of Roman attitudes towards sexuality and respectability. Senators who publicly condemn moral decay spend fortunes on elaborate sexual entertainments, while military commanders who preach discipline about family values maintain regular appointments with their favorite courtesans. The brothel becomes a space where public virtue and private vice negotiate their uneasy coexistence. The most fascinating aspect of Claudia's operation is how she manages the delicate balance between accessibility and exclusivity. Her establishment caters to wealthy clients who demand discretion, luxury, and the illusion of romantic connection, while also serving the practical needs of travelers, soldiers, and merchants who simply want efficient physical release. She's essentially running a full-service hospitality business that happens to include sexual services. You observe the intricate protocols that govern the courtesan's professional relationships. Regular clients receive preferential treatment, special pricing, and access to services unavailable to casual visitors. New customers undergo subtle evaluation processes that assess their wealth, social standing, and potential for long-term patronage. The most valuable clients are those who can provide not just money, but also protection, information, and introduction to other wealthy prospects. The training and education that courtesans receive reveals another dimension of their unusual social position. Claudia's women study music, poetry, philosophy, and conversation with the same intensity that aristocratic daughters devote to household management. They're expected to provide intellectual stimulation alongside physical pleasure, creating intimate experiences that married men often cannot find in their arranged marriages. The afternoon brings a different kind of visitor, a wealthy matron seeking Claudia's advice about managing an unfaithful husband. The conversation reveals the strange solidarity that sometimes develops between respectable wives and professional courtesans, women who occupy opposite ends of the social spectrum, but share common experiences of navigating male desire and female survival strategies. The business aspects of Roman prostitution prove remarkably complex and legally sophisticated. Claudia employs accountants, lawyers, and security personnel with the same care that any successful entrepreneur brings to staffing decisions. She negotiates contracts, resolves disputes, and manages a workforce that includes not only courtesans, but also musicians, cooks, cleaners, and guards. It's essentially a small corporation organized around the provision of intimate services. The evening's entertainment reveals the theatrical nature of Roman sexuality, where elaborate scenarios and role-playing transform simple physical transactions into complex psychological experiences. Clients don't just purchase sexual services. They buy temporary escape from the constraints of their public roles, the opportunity to explore fantasies that their official lives cannot accommodate. As night settles over the establishment, you witness the quiet moments when public performance gives way to private reality. The courtesans remove their professional masks, count their earnings, and share the day's experiences with a mixture of cynicism and camaraderie that characterizes all service industries. They're simultaneously more and less than the fantasies they sell. Women who have learned to transform society's contradictions into personal advantage. The contrast between the courtesan's freedom and the matron's constraint becomes starkly apparent as you observe both worlds simultaneously. While respectable wives negotiate for small freedoms within marriages they cannot escape, prostitutes accumulate wealth and independence through work that society condemns but cannot survive without. They're social outcasts who enjoy economic privileges, moral pariahs who exercise practical autonomy. You drift towards sleep contemplating the strange economics of Roman sexuality, where desire created markets that granted some women unprecedented independence while condemning them to permanent social exile. The courtesan's freedom came at the price of respectability, but for many women, that trade proved remarkably worthwhile. They chose the certainty of social contempt over the uncertainty of male protection, transforming their bodies into businesses and their stigma into strength. You step into the sacred precinct of Juno Lucina's temple just as the morning light filters through incense-heavy air, with a mingled sense of burning myrrh and nervous perspiration, create an atmosphere thick with anticipation and ancient ritual. Here, pregnant Roman women gather like pilgrims at a shrine to survival. Their silk stolas stretched taut over swelling bellies that carry both their greatest hopes and their most terrifying fears. You're about to witness the ultimate paradox of Roman womanhood, where producing children was simultaneously a woman's most sacred duty and her most dangerous occupation. The woman kneeling before the goddesses' statue moves with the careful deliberation of someone who has learned that every gesture might influence divine favor. Livia Marcella, 6 months pregnant, with what she desperately hopes will be her first surviving son, places offerings of honey cakes and silver coins while whispering prayers that blend religious devotion with practical desperation. You probably wouldn't have the stamina to survive Roman childbirth even with modern medical intervention. But these women faced it armed with nothing but prayer, superstition, and the kind of courage that makes Navy SEALs look like anxious librarians. The mainstream historical fact that emerges from observing these rituals is both sobering and strangely empowering. Roman women faced approximately a 20% chance of dying in childbirth, yet motherhood remained their primary path to social status, legal protection, and personal fulfillment. The empire's survival depended on their willingness to risk death repeatedly in service of demographic necessity, making every pregnant woman a warrior in an undeclared war against extinction. The temple's morning ceremonies reveal the elaborate support networks that surrounded Roman pregnancy and childbirth. Experienced matrons share advice about diet, exercise, and spiritual preparation, while midwives demonstrate breathing techniques and positioning strategies developed through generations of trial and occasional error. The air buzzes with conversations that blend folk wisdom, religious instruction, and the kind of practical information that could mean the difference between life and death. Historians still debate whether Roman emphasis on motherhood represented genuine reverence for feminine power or simply reflected society's need to maintain population levels in the face of constant warfare, disease, and economic instability. Some scholars argue that maternal authority provided women with their most significant source of influence and respect, allowing them to shape future generations and build lasting legacies. Others suggest that the cult of motherhood simply disguised reproductive coercion as spiritual calling. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you observe the temple's activities is that Roman women developed remarkably sophisticated knowledge about contraception, fertility timing, and pregnancy management. They understood lunar cycles, tracked ovulation patterns, and used herbal remedies that modern pharmacologists are only beginning to appreciate. These women were essentially practicing gynecology 15 centuries before it became a recognized medical specialty. You witness the complex ritual preparations that accompany Roman childbirth, ceremonies that transform medical necessity into spiritual theater. Livia's birthing chamber has been prepared with amulets, sacred stones, and carefully positioned mirrors designed to confuse evil spirits who might threaten mother or child. The room's arrangement reflects both religious devotion and practical wisdom accumulated through countless previous deliveries. The economic implications of Roman motherhood prove particularly fascinating. Successful mothers gained access to inheritance rights, property ownership, and legal standing that unmarried or childless women could never achieve. The law of ius trium liberorum granted special privileges to women who bore 3 children, including exemption from male guardianship and enhanced financial autonomy. Motherhood wasn't just biological destiny. It was a career path with measurable benefits and advancement opportunities. The afternoon brings Livia's labor, and you observe the remarkable community of women who gather to support her through the ordeal. The birthing chamber fills with female relatives, experienced midwives, and neighborhood matrons who provide everything from medical assistance to emotional encouragement. Men are rigorously excluded from this feminine domain, creating a space where women's knowledge and authority reign supreme. The midwife directing Livia's delivery demonstrates skills that would impress modern obstetric nurses. She monitors the baby's position through external manipulation, manages pain through massage and positioning techniques, and coordinates the assistance of multiple helpers with the efficiency of a surgical team. Her knowledge has been accumulated through decades of practice, passed down through generations of women who understood that childbirth survival depended on female expertise rather than divine intervention. The most intense moments of labor reveal the psychological strategies Roman women employed to survive their reproductive ordeals. Livia recites prayers to protective goddesses, visualizes successful outcomes, and draws strength from the presence of women who have survived similar trials. The birthing chamber becomes a space where individual suffering transforms into collective empowerment, where personal agony serves broader social purposes. The baby's arrival triggers celebrations that blend relief, joy, and carefully calculated political significance. The child's gender determines not only its own future, but also its mother's continued social standing. Sons provide security for aging parents and continuation of family names, while daughters represent future alliance opportunities and marriage negotiations. Every birth is simultaneously personal triumph and strategic calculation. The post-birth rituals reveal the complex relationship between maternal authority and social expectations. Livia must navigate the delicate transition from pregnant woman to mother, assuming new responsibilities while maintaining her existing duties as wife, household manager, and social participant. Motherhood grants her enhanced status, but also increased obligations that will define the remainder of her life. The evening brings the naming ceremony, where the newborn son receives his identity and legal recognition. Livia's successful delivery of a healthy male heir transforms her from vulnerable pregnant woman to respected mother, a status change that carries real economic and social benefits. The celebration reflects not just joy at the child's arrival, but also acknowledgement of the mother's achievement in surviving another reproductive campaign. You observe the intricate support networks that sustain Roman mothers through the vulnerable weeks following childbirth. Experienced women provide advice about nursing, infant care, and postpartum recovery, while female relatives assume household responsibilities that allow new mothers to focus on healing and bonding. The community of maternal knowledge operates largely outside official medical practice, creating informal healthcare systems run by and for women. The night settles over the villa as Livia begins her journey into Roman motherhood. Armed with a healthy son and the enhanced social status that successful childbirth provides. Tomorrow, she'll receive congratulations from family and friends, begin planning the child's education and future, and start preparing her body for the next pregnancy that social expectations make almost inevitable. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on the courage required to embrace motherhood in a world where pregnancy was essentially Russian roulette with higher stakes. Roman women faced reproductive challenges that would terrify modern mothers. Yet they approached childbirth with a combination of practical preparation, spiritual devotion, and community support that transformed individual ordeals into collective achievements. Their willingness to risk death repeatedly in service of new life represents perhaps the most profound form of feminine heroism in human history. You glide through the marble corridors of the Domus Transitoria, just as evening shadows lengthen across polished floors that reflect the golden glow of countless oil lamps, their flames dancing like tiny spirits in the perfumed air. Here, in the heart of imperial power, you're about to witness the most sophisticated performance in the Roman world. Women who rule an empire while maintaining the elaborate fiction that they're simply dutiful wives and devoted mothers. The scent of imported roses mingles with the subtle tension that accompanies conversations where every word carries the weight of potential revolution or ruin. The woman you encounter first moves through these opulent spaces with the calculated grace of someone who has mastered the art of wielding absolute power through apparent submission. Livia Augusta, wife of Emperor Augustus, glides past frescoed walls depicting mythological scenes that pale beside the very real drama she orchestrates daily. She's essentially running the Roman Empire from behind a veil of domestic propriety, and you probably wouldn't last 5 minutes trying to balance the kind of political intrigue that she treats as routine morning correspondence. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe her morning routine is both shocking and strangely familiar. Imperial women like Livia exercised influence that exceeded that of most senators, generals, and provincial governors, yet they could never hold official political office or command armies directly. They ruled the world's most powerful empire through networks of patronage, marriage alliances, and the kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that would make modern political consultants weep with professional envy. The imperial household's morning briefings reveal the scope of feminine influence in Roman governance. Livia receives reports from agents across the empire, reviews petitions from provincial governors, and discusses policy matters with advisors who understand that her opinions carry the weight of imperial decree. She's essentially serving as an unofficial co-emperor, making decisions that affect millions of lives while maintaining the comfortable fiction that she's simply managing household affairs. Historians still debate whether imperial women represented genuine female empowerment or simply reflected the personal nature of autocratic government, where proximity to power mattered more than official titles or legal authority. Some scholars argue that empresses like Livia created new models of feminine leadership that influenced political development for centuries. Others suggest that their influence was entirely dependent on male approval and disappeared the moment imperial favor shifted. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you follow Livia through her daily routine is that imperial women developed sophisticated intelligence networks that rivaled those of professional spies and military commanders. They maintained correspondence with women across the empire, gathering information about local conditions, political tensions, and potential threats through informal channels that complemented official administrative reports. You witness the delicate choreography of imperial court life, where every gesture carries symbolic weight and political significance. Livia's choice of jewelry communicates messages about foreign policy. Her seating arrangements at dinner parties indicate shifts in imperial favor, and even her selection of entertainment reflects calculated decisions about cultural values and social priorities. She's essentially conducting diplomacy through domestic theater. The economic dimensions of imperial feminine power prove particularly fascinating. Livia controls vast personal wealth that includes properties across the Mediterranean, business investments, and liquid assets that exceed the treasuries of most client kingdoms. Her financial decisions influence markets. Her patronage shapes artistic development, and her commercial partnerships affect trade relationships throughout the empire. She's essentially serving as an informal minister of economic development. The afternoon brings a stream of visitors seeking imperial favor, and you observe how Livia navigates the complex protocols that govern access to power. Senators' wives petition for their husband's advancement. Foreign dignitaries seek audience through feminine diplomatic channels, and provincial elites offer tribute disguised as gifts. She's essentially operating a parallel government that processes requests and grievances through unofficial but highly effective procedures. The most revealing aspect of imperial feminine authority is how it operates through influence rather than command, persuasion rather than decree. Livia shapes policy by suggesting rather than ordering, by creating consensus rather than imposing decisions. Her power is simultaneously more subtle and more absolute than traditional masculine authority, creating change through methods that leave no official fingerprints. The evening's entertainment reveals another dimension of imperial feminine influence, the role of cultural patron and arbiter of social values. Livia sponsors poets, architects, and philosophers whose work shapes imperial ideology and popular culture. She's essentially serving as an unofficial minister of propaganda, using art and literature to communicate political messages and social expectations to audiences across the empire. You observe the intricate balancing act that imperial women must maintain between visibility and discretion, between influence and official invisibility. Livia must be prominent enough to command respect and attention, yet careful never to appear to threaten masculine prerogatives or challenge traditional gender roles. It's like performing a high-wire act where the safety net is made of political correctness and public opinion. The night brings private consultations where the Empress's real work unfolds away from public scrutiny. Livia meets with trusted advisors to discuss succession planning, military appointments, and provincial administration. These conversations reveal the extent to which imperial policy emerges from feminine insight and intuition rather than masculine calculation and force. The contrast between public performance and private authority becomes starkly apparent as you witness both simultaneously. In public, Livia appears as the ideal Roman matron, modest, supportive, focused on family welfare. In private, she functions as a strategic mastermind whose decisions shape the destiny of civilizations. The gap between appearance and reality is so vast it could swallow entire provinces. The Sleeping Palace holds the accumulated achievements of feminine imperial governance. Policies influenced, appointments arranged, crises resolved, and enemies neutralized through methods so subtle that historians still debate their mechanisms centuries later. The Empress's power was real but invisible, acknowledged but officially non-existent, celebrated but carefully disguised. As you drift towards sleep, you reflect on the extraordinary courage required to exercise absolute power while maintaining absolute invisibility. Imperial women like Livia ruled empires through whispered suggestions and gentle manipulations, wielding influence that exceeded that of kings while pretending to be nothing more than devoted wives. Their success depended on their ability to appear powerless while exercising power, to seem subordinate while actually commanding, to maintain the fiction of feminine submission while orchestrating masculine decisions. You realize that these women created new forms of leadership that operated outside traditional structures of authority, proving that influence could be more effective than command, that persuasion could accomplish more than force, and that the most powerful rulers might be those who never officially ruled at all. Their legacy challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of power, authority, and governance that continue to resonate in political systems across the modern world. You slip through the moonlit gardens of a Roman villa on the night of the Bonadie festival, where the air thrums with whispered incantations and the rustle of silk stolas moving through shadows like secrets given form. The scent of burning laurel mingles with wine-sweetened breath as you approach the most forbidden gathering in the Roman calendar. A religious ceremony where women temporarily escape the watchful eyes of fathers, husbands, and brothers to commune with divine feminine power. Tonight, you're about to witness what happens when Roman matrons shed their carefully maintained masks of submission and embrace rituals that would make their menfolk spontaneously develop nervous conditions. The woman leading tonight's ceremonies moves with the fluid authority of someone channeling forces older than the Seven Hills themselves. Claudia Pulchra, a senator's wife by day and high priestess by moonlight, raises her arms toward the star-scattered sky as dozens of Rome's most respectable women gather in a sacred circle that excludes every person with testicles within a 5-mile radius. You probably wouldn't have the spiritual stamina to participate in these ancient rites, but these women dive into feminine divinity with the enthusiasm of people who've been spiritually starving on a diet of masculine gods and patriarchal prayers. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe the evening's preparations is both liberating and slightly terrifying. The Bonadie, a festival granted Roman women temporary autonomy that bordered on revolutionary, allowing them to gather without male supervision, consume wine freely, and participate in religious mysteries that remained absolutely forbidden to men. For one night each year, the most controlled women in the ancient world became the most free, creating sacred space where feminine power could unfold without apology or explanation. The ritual preparations reveal the sophisticated religious knowledge that Roman women maintained parallel to official state religion. They understand herb lore that would impress modern botanists, practice healing techniques passed down through generations of mothers and daughters, and preserve spiritual traditions that predate Rome's founding by centuries. The garden transforms into an outdoor temple where feminine wisdom operates according to its own ancient logic. Historians still debate whether women-only religious festivals represented genuine spiritual empowerment or simply provided controlled outlets for feminine energy that might otherwise challenge masculine authority. Some scholars argue that these ceremonies created authentic sacred space where women could explore aspects of divinity unavailable through conventional worship. Others suggest that the festivals functioned as pressure valves, allowing temporary rebellion that ultimately reinforced permanent subordination. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as the ceremonies begin is that Roman women used religious festivals to conduct business, share information, and coordinate activities that would have been impossible under normal social supervision. Tonight's gathering serves simultaneously as spiritual worship, networking event, an informal parliament where women discuss everything from child-rearing strategies to political developments. You witness the transformation that occurs as respectable matrons shed their public personas and embrace roles as priestesses, healers, and mystic celebrants. The senator's wife becomes a dancing devotee. The merchant's spouse transforms into a prophetic oracle, and the general's daughter channels divine wisdom that has nothing to do with military strategy. It's like watching a group of corporate executives discover they're actually powerful sorceresses who've been hiding under business suits. The evening's rituals unfold with hypnotic intensity as the women invoke Bona Dei through chants, dances, and offerings that blend formal religious observance with ecstatic spiritual experience. They pour wine libations, burn sacred herbs, and share mystical visions that emerge from collective feminine consciousness rather than individual inspiration. The air becomes thick with incense and possibility, charged with energies that official Roman religion never acknowledges. The most fascinating aspect of the Bona Dei festival is how it temporarily inverts normal social hierarchies. Slave women participate as equals alongside aristocratic matrons. Young girls receive wisdom from elderly priestesses, and social status becomes irrelevant in the face of shared feminine spirituality. For these sacred hours, Rome's most rigid class distinctions dissolve into collective celebration of divine feminine power. The midnight ceremonies reach their climax as the women engage in prophetic rituals that would make modern psychologists frantically take notes. They interpret dreams, read omens in natural phenomena, and share visions that provide guidance for everything from personal relationships to imperial policy. These aren't party games. They're sophisticated divination practices that influence real-world decisions made by some of Rome's most powerful families. You observe the healing rituals that form another crucial component of feminine religious practice. Women share herbal remedies, practice therapeutic massage, and perform spiritual cleansing ceremonies that address physical, emotional, and psychological ailments. The festival becomes a temporary hospital where feminine healing wisdom operates outside official medical authority, providing healthcare that conventional physicians rarely offer. The wine consumption that accompanies the Bona Dei festival serves purposes beyond simple celebration. For many Roman women, this represents their only opportunity to drink alcohol without social condemnation, to experience the loosened inhibitions and enhanced courage that wine provides. The sacred context transforms potential vice into religious sacrament, allowing temporary escape from the sobriety that everyday respectability demands. The dawn approaches as the ceremonies wind toward their conclusion, and you witness the gradual transformation of priestesses back into proper Roman matrons. Ritual garments are carefully stored, sacred implements are hidden away, and evidence of the night's activities is methodically eliminated. By sunrise, these women will resume their official roles as dutiful wives and mothers, carrying secret knowledge and renewed spiritual strength into their ordinary lives. The morning light reveals the villa's garden restored to conventional appearance, showing no trace of the extraordinary spiritual theater that unfolded through the darkness. The women depart separately, returning to households where they'll spend the coming year maintaining the fiction that they're spiritually satisfied by masculine religious authority and conventional domestic roles. As you observe their departures, you realize that the Bonadier festival represents something revolutionary disguised as tradition, rebellion masquerading as religious observance. These women created sacred space within patriarchal society, carved out spiritual territory where feminine power could operate according to its own principles and purposes. The sleeping city holds no memory of the night's transformations, yet the women carry its influence into their daily lives, empowered by connection to divine feminine energy that official culture denies but cannot eliminate. Their secret spiritual lives provide strength, wisdom, and solidarity that help them navigate the challenges of existence in a world designed to limit their possibilities. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the courage required to maintain parallel spiritual lives within oppressive social systems. Roman women who participated in feminine mysteries were simultaneously conformists and revolutionaries, dutiful citizens and secret rebels. Their religious festivals illuminated the human need for sacred space that honors all aspects of divine power, including those that threaten conventional authority structures. You find yourself in the quiet sanctuary of a private library just as the afternoon sun filters through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across scrolls and wax tablets that contain knowledge powerful enough to reshape empires. The air carries the familiar scent of papyrus and ink, mixed with the subtle perfume of a woman who has discovered that the most dangerous rebellion involves not swords or speeches, but simply learning to think. Here, you're about to witness the quiet revolution of Roman women who dared to educate themselves in a world that preferred them beautiful, silent, and intellectually ornamental. The woman bent over a Greek manuscript moves with the focused intensity of someone savoring forbidden fruit that happens to be written in iambic pentameter. Sulpicia Lepidana, daughter of a wealthy merchant, has transformed what should have been her dowry negotiations into something far more subversive, a comprehensive education that would make most senators look like they learned rhetoric from drunk gladiators. You probably wouldn't have the intellectual stamina to master Greek philosophy while simultaneously managing a household and dodging marriage proposals. But Sulpicia approaches learning with the methodical determination of someone who understands that knowledge is the one form of wealth that can never be confiscated. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe her study session is both inspiring and deeply frustrating. While Roman law theoretically restricted women's access to formal education, wealthy families often provided their daughters with instruction that rivaled or exceeded what their sons received. These women studied literature, philosophy, mathematics, and rhetoric not because society encouraged their intellectual development, but because their families recognized that educated women made more valuable marriage partners and household managers. The library's collection reveals the sophisticated networks through which Roman women accessed learning and intellectual community. Sulpicia corresponds with female scholars across the empire, borrowing manuscripts, sharing translations, and participating in philosophical debates through carefully coded letters that discuss Aristotelian ethics alongside recipes for honey cakes. She's essentially operating an underground university that operates through feminine friendship and mutual intellectual support. Historians still debate whether educated Roman women represented genuine intellectual empowerment or simply reflected elite families' investment in producing more sophisticated ornaments for their social displays. Some scholars argue that female learning created authentic opportunities for intellectual development and cultural contribution that challenged traditional gender limitations. Others suggest that women's education remained fundamentally decorative, designed to make them more entertaining companions rather than serious thinkers. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you examine Sulpicia studies is that Roman women developed distinctive approaches to philosophy and literature that emphasized practical wisdom over abstract theory. They focused on ethical systems that addressed real-world problems, literary forms that explored emotional complexity, and intellectual frameworks that integrated rather than separated different areas of knowledge. You witness the delicate balancing act that educated women must maintain between displaying their learning and avoiding accusations of unwomanly ambition. Sulpicia quotes Cicero while discussing household management, references Plato while planning dinner parties, and applies Stoic principles to child-rearing strategies. She's essentially conducting advanced intellectual work disguised as domestic competence, proving that wisdom can flourish even when it must remain officially invisible. The afternoon brings a clandestine gathering of women who share passion for learning and intellectual discourse. They meet under the pretense of religious study, but their conversations range across philosophy, politics, literature, and natural science with the sophistication of professional academics. The room fills with the excited energy of minds that have been intellectually starving on a diet of conventional feminine pursuits. The economic realities of women's education prove particularly complex. Sulpicia's father invests in her learning partly because educated daughters command higher dowries and attract more prestigious marriage alliances, but also because he recognizes her genuine intellectual gifts. The boundary between investment and exploitation becomes blurred when natural ability meets family economic strategy. The most fascinating aspect of feminine intellectual culture is how it operates through networks of mutual support and shared resources. Women lend each other books, share tutors, and create informal scholarly communities that transcend social boundaries. A senator's daughter might study geometry with a freedwoman who excels in mathematics, while a merchant's wife teaches poetry to an aristocrat's daughter who struggles with meter. You observe the sophisticated methods that educated women employ to pursue serious scholarship while maintaining social respectability. They frame philosophical inquiry as moral education, disguise political analysis as household management advice, and present literary criticism as religious contemplation. It's like watching professional scholars perform elaborate intellectual drag, maintaining scholarly rigor while wearing socially acceptable costumes. The evening study session focuses on rhetoric and public speaking, skills that women cannot officially use but privately develop with impressive dedication. Sulpicia practices persuasive arguments about household economics that employ the same logical structures used in senatorial debates, developing oratorical abilities that she'll never be allowed to display publicly, but that will serve her well in private negotiations and family councils. The contrast between public ignorance and private knowledge becomes starkly apparent as you witness Sulpicia's transformation between social and scholarly settings. In public, she appears as a charming but intellectually modest young woman whose greatest accomplishment involves embroidery. In private, she dissects complex philosophical arguments with analytical precision that would impress professional scholars. The night brings solitary study, where Sulpicia engages with texts that challenge fundamental assumptions about women's nature, social role, and intellectual capacity. She reads female philosophers like Aspasia and Diotima, discovering intellectual traditions that official culture ignores or dismisses. These nocturnal encounters with feminine wisdom provide both inspiration and validation for her own scholarly pursuits. As you observe her late-night reading, you realize that educated Roman women were conducting a quiet revolution that operated through individual transformation rather than collective action. Each woman who learned to read Greek was claiming intellectual territory. Every philosophical discussion was asserting cognitive equality, and each scholarly achievement was proving that feminine minds could engage complex ideas with depth and sophistication. The sleeping library holds the accumulated treasures of feminine intellectual rebellion. Manuscripts copied by women's hands, philosophical insights developed through feminine perspectives, and knowledge networks that operated parallel to official scholarly institutions. These women created alternative intellectual cultures that preserved and developed ideas that formal academic establishments often ignored. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the extraordinary persistence required to pursue learning in environments designed to discourage intellectual curiosity. Roman women who sought education faced not just social disapproval, but also practical obstacles that made every scholarly achievement a victory against systemic discouragement. Their commitment to learning represents perhaps the most profound form of long-term rebellion, creating change through intellectual development rather than political confrontation. You step into the cool marble atrium of a Roman villa just as dawnlight filters through the impluvium, casting shimmering reflections across walls painted with scenes of abundance and prosperity. The air carries the subtle scent of counting coins and the rustle of silk that costs more than most people earn in a lifetime, where morning conversations blend romantic poetry with investment strategies that would make modern financial advisors weep tears of pure envy. Here, you're about to discover how Roman women transformed the language of love into the arithmetic of power, creating intimate relationships that operated like sophisticated business partnerships with occasional kissing. The woman reviewing her morning correspondence moves through columns of figures with the fluid grace of someone who has learned that romance, without financial security, is just expensive daydreaming. Claudia Maxima examines marriage proposals the way modern investors analyze stock portfolios, evaluating potential husbands based on their liquid assets, real estate holdings, and projected inheritance schedules. You probably wouldn't have the mathematical stamina to calculate the romantic return on investment for 3 different suitors before breakfast. But Claudia approaches love with the methodical precision of someone who understands that passion fades, but compound interest is forever. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe her calculations is both practical and slightly depressing. Roman marriages among the elite were essentially mergers between family corporations, where emotional compatibility ranked somewhere below livestock inventories in terms of negotiation priorities. Love might develop over time, but financial stability was required from day one, creating relationships that functioned like romantic business partnerships with legally binding cuddle contracts. The morning's financial review reveals the sophisticated economic strategies that Roman women employed to maintain independence within marriage. Claudia's dowry has been invested in textile manufacturing, wine production, and shipping ventures that generate income beyond her husband's control. She's essentially operating a private hedge fund disguised as household management, proving that the best way to ensure marital happiness is to maintain the option of expensive divorce. Historians still debate whether Roman women's financial autonomy represented genuine economic empowerment or simply reflected the practical needs of elite families who required competent asset managers regardless of gender. Some scholars argue that property ownership gave women real leverage in domestic negotiations and social positioning. Others suggest that financial independence remained largely theoretical, constrained by social expectations and legal limitations that reduced economic power to elaborate allowances. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you examine Claudia's investment portfolio is that Roman women often outperformed their male relatives in business ventures, generating superior returns through more conservative strategies and better risk assessment. They understood that slow, steady growth was preferable to spectacular gains followed by catastrophic losses, an approach that would make modern pension fund managers spontaneously applaud. You witness the delicate negotiations that surround a potential second marriage, where Claudia's widowhood has transformed her from valuable commodity into discerning customer. She evaluates suitors based on their debt-to-income ratios, property management skills, and track records with previous wives who may or may not have died under suspicious circumstances. It's like speed dating for people who understand that prenuptial agreements are love letters written in legal Latin. The economic realities of Roman romance prove remarkably complex and refreshingly honest. Dowries function as venture capital investments in matrimonial startups. Inheritance laws create long-term financial planning that spans generations, and divorce settlements operate like corporate restructuring deals with emotional damages included. The system acknowledges that successful relationships require compatible financial goals alongside compatible personalities. The afternoon brings a meeting with Claudia's business manager, a freedman whose accounting skills have transformed her modest inheritance into a substantial fortune. They discuss shipping contracts, real estate acquisitions, and money-lending operations that generate the kind of passive income that allows romantic relationships to develop naturally rather than under economic pressure. The most fascinating aspect of Roman women's economic power is how it influences their romantic choices and relationship dynamics. Claudia can afford to reject suitors who offer insufficient emotional satisfaction because her financial independence eliminates desperation from romantic calculations. She's essentially shopping for love rather than survival, a luxury that transforms intimate relationships from economic necessities into lifestyle choices. You observe the sophisticated social networks that connect financially independent Roman women, relationships that facilitate everything from business partnerships to marriage recommendations. They share investment advice, coordinate commercial ventures, and provide financial support during economic downturns or family crises. It's like a combination country club and mutual aid society that operates through carefully managed feminine friendships. The evening's entertainment reveals another dimension of economic romance, the role of cultural patronage in attracting desirable partners. Claudia sponsors poets, musicians, and artists whose work enhances her social status and creates opportunities for romantic encounters with intellectually compatible suitors. She's essentially using art appreciation as an elaborate dating strategy that doubles as tax-deductible cultural investment. The dinner party that follows showcases the integration of financial discussion into social entertainment. Guests discuss everything from Egyptian wheat futures to Gallic mining investments while consuming delicacies that demonstrate the hostess's economic sophistication. Romance develops through conversations about portfolio diversification and risk management strategies, proving that nothing is more seductive than competent financial planning. The night brings private consultations where Claudia reviews the day's romantic and financial developments with her closest female advisors. They analyze suitor behavior through economic lenses, evaluating romantic gestures based on their financial sustainability and long-term implications. A man who brings expensive gifts might be financially irresponsible, while one who discusses practical household management might offer genuine partnership potential. As you observe these evening deliberations, you realize that Roman women created a unique synthesis of emotional and economic considerations that modern relationship counselors are only beginning to understand. They recognize that sustainable intimacy requires compatible financial values, that romantic satisfaction depends partly on economic security, and that the most passionate relationships often emerge from partnerships built on mutual respect for each other's financial competence. The Sleeping Villa holds the accumulated wisdom of feminine economic romance, investment strategies that ensure independence, relationship models that balance passion with practicality, and social networks that provide both financial support and emotional guidance. These women understood that the most revolutionary act might be learning to love from a position of economic strength rather than financial desperation. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the sophisticated integration of romance and finance that characterized elite Roman relationships. These women proved that economic empowerment enhanced rather than diminished romantic possibilities, that financial independence created space for authentic emotional connection, and that the most enduring intimate relationships often emerge from partnerships where both parties contributed economic value alongside emotional support. You slip through the side entrance of a Roman slave market, just as the morning fog begins to lift from the Tiber, carrying with it the mingled sense of unwashed bodies, fierce sweat, and the kind of desperation that clings to human skin like expensive perfume gone wrong. Here, in the shadows between marble columns where sunlight fears to linger too long, you're about to witness the most heartbreaking paradox of the ancient world, where women with no legal rights somehow found ways to negotiate survival, resistance, and occasionally, against all odds, something resembling freedom. The woman standing on the auction block moves with the careful stillness of someone who has learned that every gesture might determine whether she lives through the next hour or becomes another forgotten casualty of imperial expansion. Lydia, A Greek-speaking girl from somewhere that no longer exists on any map surveys the crowd of potential buyers with eyes that have already seen too much for her 18 years. You probably wouldn't survive 5 minutes of the psychological warfare required to maintain sanity while being evaluated like livestock. But she's developed the kind of mental armor that would make Stoic philosophers weep with professional admiration. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe the morning's proceedings is both devastating and oddly empowering. Enslaved women in Rome faced sexual exploitation as a routine part of their existence. Yet many managed to accumulate property, influence, and social connections that sometimes led to manumission and occasionally to remarkable prosperity. The system was designed to destroy them, but human resilience proved more creative than institutional cruelty. The auction's dynamics reveal the complex calculations that govern the Roman slave trade. Lydia's price reflects not just her physical attractiveness, but also her education, her apparent health, and her potential for generating long-term economic value through skilled labor or successful childbearing. She's being evaluated as simultaneously a luxury purchase and a business investment, which is roughly as dehumanizing as it sounds. Historians still debate whether enslaved women who achieved relative comfort or freedom within Roman households represented genuine empowerment or simply reflected the system's ability to co-opt resistance through limited privileges. Some scholars argue that successful slave women created alternative models of female agency that influenced broader social development. Others suggest that exceptional cases simply proved how thoroughly the system destroyed most people while creating illusions of opportunity. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you observe the market's operations is that enslaved women often possessed more practical freedom of movement and economic opportunity than married free women, whose lives were constrained by legal guardianship and social expectations. The slave who earned her freedom could own property, conduct business, and make decisions that respectable wives could never consider. You witness the devastating moment of sale, where Lydia is purchased by a household agent whose poker face suggests he's buying furniture rather than a human being whose life he's about to completely transform. The transaction involves paperwork, warranties, and return policies that treat conscious suffering as a commercial inconvenience rather than moral catastrophe. The journey to her new household reveals the strange liminal space that enslaved women occupy between property and person, between object and agent. Lydia walks through Rome's streets in chains, yet her mind actively processes information about escape routes, potential allies, and survival strategies. She's simultaneously powerless and plotting, defeated and defiant. The villa she enters represents a microcosm of Roman society's contradictions regarding slavery and femininity. The household includes slaves who have achieved positions of real authority, freed women who continue working for former masters, and free women whose actual power pales beside that of skilled slave administrators. The hierarchy is simultaneously rigid and fluid, brutal, and surprisingly meritocratic. The afternoon brings Lydia's assignment to textile production, where she joins a workshop that operates like a small factory under the supervision of a freed woman who was once enslaved herself. The work is demanding but skilled, requiring intelligence and creativity that contradicts everything Roman law says about slave capabilities. She's essentially entering a professional training program disguised as forced labor. The most revealing aspect of slave life is how women create networks of mutual support and resistance within systems designed to isolate and control them. Lydia quickly identifies other women who share information about masters' habits, treatment strategies, and potential opportunities for advancement or escape. They're operating an underground intelligence service that would make modern spy agencies jealous. You observe the complex relationships that develop between enslaved women and their mistresses, connections that blend exploitation with genuine affection, authority with dependence. The senator's wife who owns Lydia relies on her skills, intelligence, and emotional support in ways that create real intimacy alongside legal ownership. It's like friendship with a massive power imbalance and occasional threat of violent punishment. The evening brings household religious observances where enslaved women participate in family rituals that temporarily blur the boundaries between property and person. Lydia shares in prayers, celebrations, and ceremonies that acknowledge her humanity while maintaining her legal status as an object. The cognitive dissonance would drive modern psychologists to early retirement. The night reveals the most private aspects of slave existence, where women like Lydia maintain inner lives that no master can touch or control. She preserves memories of her homeland, practices religious beliefs that predate her enslavement, and nurtures hopes for future freedom that sustain her through daily indignities. Her spirit remains unconquered even when her body belongs to someone else. As weeks pass, you witness Lydia's gradual adaptation to slavery that demonstrates both the system's psychological damage and human resilience's remarkable persistence. She learns to navigate household politics, develops valuable skills, and begins accumulating the small privileges that might eventually lead to manumission. She's simultaneously being destroyed and reconstructed, broken down and rebuilt. The most heartbreaking moments come when Lydia forms genuine relationships with other household members, both enslaved and free, that create emotional bonds within fundamentally exploitative structures. She cares about people who legally own her, finds friendship with women who could have her beaten, and develops loyalty to a household that represents her captivity. The complexity of Roman slavery becomes apparent as you observe how some enslaved women achieved remarkable positions within household hierarchies, managing other slaves, controlling substantial resources, and wielding influence that exceeded that of many free women. The system created pathways to relative power that remained absolutely dependent on continued subordination. You drift toward sleep, contemplating the extraordinary courage required to maintain humanity within dehumanizing systems. Enslaved Roman women survived through intelligence, adaptability, and the kind of psychological strength that transforms victimization into strategy. Their resistance operated through daily choices rather than dramatic gestures, proving that revolution can occur one small act of dignity at a time. Their stories illuminate the darkest contradictions of Roman civilization while revealing the indomitable nature of human spirit. Even in the most oppressive circumstances, women found ways to preserve their essence, protect each other, and occasionally transform their suffering into something resembling triumph. You glide through the morning light, filtering into a Roman lady's private chambers, where mirrors of polished bronze catch and scatter golden reflections across surfaces laden with cosmetic treasures that would make modern influencers weep with material envy. The air carries the intoxicating blend of imported perfumes, heated curling irons, and the subtle tension that accompanies any activity where personal expression meets political statement. Here, you're about to discover how Roman women transformed the simple act of getting dressed into sophisticated communication systems that could topple governments or negotiate peace treaties, depending on whether they chose pearls or emeralds with their morning rebellion. The woman seated before an elaborate vanity moves through her beauty ritual with the focused intensity of a general preparing for battle, which isn't entirely metaphorical, since her outfit choices today might influence a senator's vote or a merchant's contract negotiations. Flavia Domitilla examines her reflection with the calculating gaze of someone who understands that in a world where women can't speak in the forum, they must learn to make their jewelry do the talking. You probably wouldn't have the strategic stamina to encode complex political messages in your accessory choices before the first cock crows, but Flavia approaches fashion with the methodical precision of someone who has mastered the art of revolutionary couture. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe her morning transformation is both fascinating and slightly exhausting. Roman women used clothing, hairstyles, and cosmetics as sophisticated communication systems that conveyed everything from family allegiances to political opinions to romantic availability. A purple stripe might indicate imperial favor, while a particular hair ornament could signal support for specific legislation currently under senatorial debate. The cosmetic preparation reveals the remarkable complexity of Roman beauty culture, where achieving the perfect look required knowledge that would challenge modern chemistry students. Flavia's slave assistants mix lead-based face powder with mercury eye makeup and antimony-enhanced kohl, creating a beauty routine that's simultaneously gorgeous and potentially lethal. The pursuit of attractiveness apparently required the kind of risk tolerance usually associated with gladiatorial combat. Historians still debate whether Roman women's elaborate fashion choices represented genuine self-expression or simply reflected their society's reduction of feminine value to visual decoration. Some scholars argue that fashion and beauty provided authentic channels for creativity, status communication, and even political influence. Others suggest that the emphasis on appearance simply reinforced women's objectification while giving them illusions of agency through consumer choice. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you watch Flavia's transformation is that Roman women developed remarkably sophisticated understanding of color theory, textile chemistry, and visual psychology centuries before these became recognized academic disciplines. They understood which combinations enhanced natural features, which materials created desired social impressions, and which styles communicated specific cultural messages. You witness the intricate process of hair arrangement that transforms Flavia from sleepy aristocrat into walking art installation. Her hairstylist, a Greek slave with fingers that move like a virtuoso musician's, creates elaborate architectural constructions using heated irons, scented oils, and enough hairpins to stock a small armory. The resulting style will communicate Flavia's social status, family connections, and personal taste while requiring 3 hours of daily maintenance. The jewelry selection process reveals another layer of fashion's political significance. Each piece carries symbolic weight. Pearls from the Red Sea suggest exotic trade connections. Gold work from Germanic tribes indicates military conquest profits, and emeralds from Egypt reference intellectual sophistication. Flavia's accessories essentially function as a wearable resume that advertises her family's achievements and current influence. The clothing choices prove equally complex and strategically significant. The texture of Flavia's silk announces her wealth, while its color references current political fashions and the arrangement of its folds follows styles associated with specific social movements. She's essentially wearing her opinions while maintaining plausible deniability about their political implications. The morning's beauty routine includes cosmetic techniques that blur the line between enhancement and transformation. Flavia uses plant-based dyes to modify her natural coloring, applies powders that create optical illusions about bone structure, and employs scented oils that function as primitive aromatherapy designed to influence both her own mood and others' reactions to her presence. You observe the social dynamics that surround Roman fashion, where women's appearance choices become subjects of intense scrutiny and discussion. Flavia's style will be analyzed by other women seeking to decode her messages, criticized by conservative relatives who prefer traditional modesty, and evaluated by potential political allies looking for signs of ideological compatibility. The afternoon brings a social gathering where fashion functions as a complex communication system among Rome's elite women. They read each other's outfit choices like newspaper headlines, interpreting jewelry arrangements as political endorsements and hairstyle modifications as declarations of family loyalty or rebellion. The room becomes a battlefield where silent fashion wars determine social hierarchies and alliance structures. The most revealing aspect of Roman women's fashion culture is how it operates as both constraint and liberation simultaneously. Social expectations demand elaborate presentation that consumes enormous time and resources, yet the system also provides opportunities for creativity, status competition, and subtle political communication that would otherwise be impossible. The evening's transformation for dinner entertainment reveals fashion's theatrical dimensions. Flavia changes into garments that reference mythological themes, historical periods, and cultural traditions that create immersive experiences for her guests. She's essentially cosplaying as various aspects of Roman identity while hosting a dinner party that doubles as performance art. The night brings the elaborate ritual of beauty removal, where Flavia's elaborate construction is carefully dismantled and preserved for future use. Cosmetics are cleansed away with oils and perfumed waters. Jewelry is cataloged and stored, and clothing is examined for wear that might affect future appearances. Even her beauty routine's conclusion requires strategic planning. As you observe the evening's unwinding process, you realize that Roman women's fashion culture represented both the ultimate expression of feminine creativity and its systematic containment within socially acceptable channels. They created art through appearance while remaining trapped within systems that reduced their value to visual impact. The Sleeping Villa holds the accumulated artifacts of feminine self-expression, cosmetic innovations that influenced beauty standards for centuries, textile techniques that advanced material culture, and communication systems that operated through visual rather than verbal channels. These women proved that constraint could inspire rather than eliminate creativity, that limitation could generate rather than prevent innovation. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the enormous energy that Roman women devoted to appearance management, recognizing both the cultural pressures that demanded such effort and the remarkable artistry they achieved within those constraints. Their fashion choices illuminate the complex relationships between personal expression and social expectation, between individual creativity and collective conformity, that continue to influence how people navigate identity through appearance across cultures and centuries. You slip through the heavy wooden doors of Rome's most exclusive gymnasium, just as the afternoon heat begins to shimmer off marble walls adorned with frescoes that would make your grandmother clutch her pearls and demand immediate censorship. The air carries the intoxicating blend of olive oil, masculine sweat, and the kind of forbidden attraction that makes respectable matrons suddenly develop urgent interest in athletic sponsorship. Here, in the shadows where muscle meets marble and social convention crumbles like poorly mixed concrete, you're about to witness the most scandalous open secret in Roman society: the irresistible magnetism between patrician women and the gladiators who represent everything their official lives deny. The woman watching from behind a silk veil moves with the predatory grace of someone who has learned to hunt while maintaining the appearance of casual window shopping. Julia Agrippina, not the empress, but a senator's wife with impeccable breeding and apparently flexible moral standards, surveys the training gladiators with the focused intensity of someone evaluating prize stallions for purposes that definitely aren't equestrian. You probably wouldn't have the social courage to publicly admire half-naked warriors while technically married to someone who debates tax policy for entertainment. But Julia has perfected the art of respectable voyeurism. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe the afternoon's dynamics is both titillating and deeply disturbing. Roman society simultaneously condemned gladiators as social outcasts beneath contempt while creating a celebrity culture that made them objects of intense sexual fascination for women across all social classes. These men were literally condemned to death for public entertainment, yet somehow became the ancient world's equivalent of rock stars with significantly more dangerous day jobs. The training session unfolds with brutal beauty as gladiators practice combat techniques that transform violence into artistry. Their bodies, sculpted by constant warfare and careful diet, move through fighting forms with a fluid precision of deadly dancers. The afternoon light catches the gleam of oil on bronze skin, creating visual poetry that explains why Roman women risked scandal, divorce, and social ruin for the chance to touch these living monuments to masculine power. Historians still debate whether the gladiator phenomenon represented genuine subversion of Roman social hierarchies or simply provided controlled outlets for aristocratic rebellion that ultimately reinforced class boundaries. Some scholars argue that gladiator worship created authentic cross-class connections that challenge traditional status systems. Others suggest that the fantasy relationships simply allowed privileged women to experiment with transgression while maintaining their actual social positions. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you watch the interactions is that gladiator schools functioned as sophisticated entertainment complexes that deliberately cultivated female admiration through carefully orchestrated public relations campaigns. They understood that feminine patronage provided crucial financial support and social legitimacy that helped transform condemned criminals into celebrated athletes. You witnessed the complex economics of gladiator celebrity, where success in the arena translates into luxury accommodations, gourmet food, professional medical care, and access to social circles that should theoretically remain forever closed to enslaved prisoners. The most successful fighters accumulate wealth, influence, and romantic options that exceed those available to many free citizens. The afternoon's most revealing moment comes when Julia arranges a private meeting with her chosen gladiator, a Thracian warrior whose combat skills are matched only by his understanding of upper-class feminine psychology. Their conversation blends genuine intellectual connection with obvious physical attraction, creating relationships that transcend simple physical transaction while remaining fundamentally constrained by social impossibility. The gladiator training quarters reveal another dimension of this strange social phenomenon: the sophisticated culture that develops within these schools, where men from across the empire create communities based on shared danger rather than common origin. They develop their own codes of honor, loyalty structures, and survival strategies that often prove more authentic than the social conventions governing respectable society. You observe the elaborate rituals that surround gladiator-patrician relationships, ceremonies that transform scandalous liaisons into quasi-religious experiences. Women like Julia frame their attraction in terms of spiritual devotion to Mars or Venus, creating theological justifications for desires that social convention absolutely forbids. It's like developing a religious sect based on the worship of divinely inspired abs. The evening brings clandestine gatherings where elite women share information about gladiator performances, training schedules, and personal characteristics with the enthusiasm typically reserved for military intelligence operations. They've essentially created an informal fan club network that operates through feminine social channels while maintaining absolute secrecy from masculine oversight. The most fascinating aspect of gladiator attraction is how it reveals the psychological constraints of elite Roman marriage. Women trapped in strategic unions with men chosen for political compatibility rather than personal attraction find in gladiators everything their official relationships lack: physical passion, emotional intensity, and the excitement of genuine danger. The night's secret meeting between Julia and her gladiator reveals the tragic impossibility that defines these relationships. They can share passionate encounters and genuine emotional connection, but social reality makes any permanent union absolutely impossible. Their love exists entirely in stolen moments, sustained by intensity that partial fulfillment creates rather than satisfies. As you observe their parting, you realize that gladiator-patrician relationships represent both the ultimate expression of feminine rebellion and its systematic containment within manageable boundaries. These women challenge social expectations while remaining trapped within systems that make authentic freedom impossible, finding liberation through relationships that can never achieve genuine resolution. The sleeping city holds the secrets of countless similar relationships, connections that burn with intensity precisely because they cannot last, loves that achieve perfection through their own impossibility. Roman women who loved gladiators were simultaneously brave rebels and tragic victims, challenging social boundaries while remaining imprisoned by them. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the strange psychology of forbidden attraction, where social prohibition creates desire that conventional relationships cannot match. These women discovered that the most passionate connections often develop in the spaces between social categories, where official rules cannot operate, but human hearts refuse to recognize boundaries. Their stories illuminate the eternal tension between social expectation and personal desire, revealing how prohibition can intensify rather than eliminate attraction, and how the most profound relationships sometimes flourish precisely because they cannot survive. You find yourself traveling along dusty provincial roads that wind through landscapes where Roman eagles cast shadows over cultures that predate their arrival by millennia, where the empire's carefully constructed rules about women dissolve like morning mist in the face of local traditions that refuse to recognize imperial authority over matters of the heart. The air carries the scent of foreign spices mixed with familiar anxiety. As you venture beyond the seven hills into territories where Roman wives discover that their carefully negotiated freedoms are either dramatically expanded or suddenly evaporate, depending on which side of which river they happen to call home. The woman stepping down from her traveling litter moves with the cautious grace of someone who has learned that crossing provincial boundaries can transform legal rights faster than a bad chariot accident transforms political careers. Claudia Marcella, following her husband's appointment as governor of Gallia Narbonensis, surveys her new domain with the calculating attention of someone realizing that her Roman marriage contract might be worth less than yesterday's fish market receipts in this particular corner of the empire. You probably wouldn't have the cultural adaptability to navigate legal systems that change every 50 miles like ancient Rome's version of international tax law, but Claudia approaches provincial life with the methodical determination of someone who has learned that survival requires constant recalibration of expectations. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe her first interactions with local customs is both liberating and terrifying. Roman women's legal status, social freedoms, and matrimonial rights varied dramatically across provincial territories, where local traditions often superseded imperial law in matters involving marriage, divorce, property ownership, and child custody. A woman who could easily divorce her husband in Rome might find herself permanently bound by Celtic marriage customs that treat separation as impossible, while a matron who required male guardianship in Italy might discover complete financial autonomy in Egyptian communities that had never heard of such restrictions. The provincial governor's residence reveals the complex cultural negotiations that characterize frontier Roman life. Claudia's household includes Roman slaves, Celtic freed women, Germanic craftspeople, and local administrators whose legal traditions create a domestic environment where different concepts of feminine authority compete for dominance. The morning's household management requires her to navigate legal systems that sometimes contradict each other within the same building. Historians still debate whether provincial diversity in women's rights represented the empire's flexible pragmatism or simply reflected incomplete Romanization that allowed pre-conquest traditions to persist in legally ambiguous forms. Some scholars argue that provincial variations created opportunities for women to shop between legal systems, choosing residence based on which offered the most advantageous treatment. Others suggest that the inconsistencies simply created confusion and vulnerability that left women without reliable legal protection. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you observe Claudia's adaptation to provincial life is that many Roman women who relocated to frontier territories experienced either dramatic expansion or severe contraction of their legal rights, depending on local customs that had developed independently of Roman law. Some discovered they could own property, conduct business, and make decisions that would have been impossible in Rome, while others found themselves subject to restrictions that made traditional Roman patriarchy look progressive. You witness the morning's legal consultation, where Claudia attempts to understand her rights regarding property ownership under the complex intersection of Roman imperial law, provincial administrative regulation, and indigenous customary practice. The conversation requires 3 translators and a Celtic law speaker whose explanations suggest that women's legal status depends partly on lunar cycles and the agricultural calendar, which is either charmingly spiritual or utterly impractical, depending on your tolerance for astrological jurisprudence. The economic realities of provincial Roman life prove particularly complex for women whose wealth and status translate differently across cultural boundaries. Claudia's Roman dowry provides substantial resources in imperial currency, but local markets operate through barter systems that value her silk stolas less than her ability to negotiate sheep trading contracts. She's essentially learning to convert cultural capital between economic systems that measure wealth through completely different standards. The afternoon brings a gathering of local women who represent the remarkable diversity of feminine experience within the empire's provincial territories. You meet Celtic priestesses whose religious authority exceeds that of any Roman matron, Germanic merchants whose trading networks span continents, and Iberian landowners whose property rights include powers that Roman law reserves exclusively for men. The conversation shifts between Latin, Celtic dialects, and Germanic languages, creating linguistic complexity that mirrors the legal confusion. The most revealing aspect of provincial women's experience is how cultural boundaries create opportunities for strategic identity negotiation. Claudia discovers that she can emphasize her Roman citizenship when dealing with imperial administrators, invoke local customary rights when interacting with indigenous communities, and claim foreign status when neither system offers advantages. It's like having multiple legal personalities that can be activated depending on immediate needs. The evening's entertainment reveals another dimension of provincial cultural mixing. The emergence of hybrid social practices that blend Roman customs with local traditions in ways that create entirely new possibilities for feminine expression. The dinner party includes Roman-style dining arrangements with Celtic bardic performances, Germanic gift exchange ceremonies, and Egyptian religious rituals that create cultural fusion experiences that metropolitan Romans couldn't imagine. You observe the complex marriage negotiations that characterize provincial Roman society, where unions must satisfy multiple legal systems simultaneously. A Roman woman marrying a local aristocrat might need to satisfy imperial marriage laws, indigenous ceremonial requirements, and provincial administrative regulations that sometimes contradict each other completely. The resulting contracts required legal expertise that would challenge modern international family law specialists. The night brings private conversations where Claudia compares her provincial experience with her memories of metropolitan Roman life, revealing both the freedoms and constraints that characterize each environment. She enjoys economic opportunities and social flexibility unavailable in Rome, yet misses the cultural sophistication and legal predictability that urban life provided. The provinces offer adventure at the cost of security, possibility at the price of certainty. As you observe her adaptation process, you realize that provincial Roman women often became cultural pioneers who created new models of feminine authority by combining different legal traditions, social customs, and economic practices. They operated at the intersection of multiple civilizations, developing hybrid identities that transcended any single cultural framework. The most fascinating discoveries come when Claudia encounters women whose lives challenge fundamental Roman assumptions about feminine capability and social role. She meets female warriors whose military authority equals that of male commanders, women priests whose religious power supersedes political authority, and merchant queens whose economic influence spans multiple provinces. These encounters force her to reconsider basic premises about gender, power, and possibility that she had never questioned within metropolitan Roman society. The sleeping frontier settlement holds the accumulated wisdom of cultural mixing, legal innovations that blend different traditions, social practices that create new possibilities, and individual adaptations that prove human flexibility can overcome institutional constraints. Provincial Roman women demonstrated that identity could be fluid, that law could be negotiated, and that freedom could be found in the spaces between official categories. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the courage required to live between cultures, to navigate legal systems that constantly shift, and to create identity from multiple traditions that sometimes contradict each other. Provincial Roman women proved that the empire's greatest strength lay not in imposing uniformity, but in accommodating diversity, creating space for human possibility to flourish beyond the constraints of any single cultural framework. You slip through the marble corridors of a Roman villa just as the evening shadows begin to lengthen and whisper of changes that will reshape the very foundations of intimate life, where the air carries the scent of burning incense mixed with something entirely new. The revolutionary fragrance of spiritual transformation that threatens to overturn everything Romans thought they understood about desire, marriage, and the human heart. Here, in hushed gatherings that feel simultaneously ancient and utterly foreign, You're about to witness the slow-motion earthquake that early Christianity created in Roman bedrooms, turning wives into zealots and husbands into bewildered observers of their own domestic revolutions. The woman kneeling in prayer moves with the serene intensity of someone who has discovered that the most radical rebellion involves not political uprising, but spiritual conversion that redefines every intimate relationship in her life. Priscilla Aquila, a senator's wife who has recently embraced the teachings of an obscure Jewish carpenter, radiates the kind of peaceful certainty that make her unconverted friends nervous, and her husband question whether he's married to the same woman who used to complain about dinner party seating arrangements. You probably wouldn't have the theological stamina to transform your entire worldview based on stories about miraculous fish distributions. But Priscilla approaches Christianity with the methodical devotion of someone who has found answers to questions she didn't know she was asking. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe the evening's clandestine worship is both inspiring and deeply disruptive. Early Christianity offered Roman women spiritual equality and moral authority that challenged fundamental assumptions about feminine nature, creating religious communities where wives could claim divine guidance that superseded masculine authority, and marriages could be redefined around shared spiritual purpose rather than economic convenience. The Christian gathering reveals the revolutionary social dynamics that characterize this new religious movement. Women participate as equals in discussions about theology, morality, and community organization, their voices carrying weight that would be impossible in traditional Roman religious or political contexts. The basement meeting room becomes a space where gender hierarchies temporarily dissolve in favor of spiritual democracy that terrifies imperial authorities and conservative husbands alike. Historians still debate whether early Christianity genuinely empowered Roman women or simply replaced one form of patriarchal control with another, substituting divine authority for masculine oversight while maintaining fundamental restrictions on feminine autonomy. Some scholars argue that Christian communities created authentic opportunities for female leadership and spiritual expression that challenge social conventions. Others suggest that the new religion simply offered different chains disguised as liberation, trading secular subordination for religious submission. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you observe the community's interactions is that early Christian women often possessed greater theological knowledge and spiritual authority than their male counterparts, serving as teachers, prophets, and community leaders in ways that would have been unthinkable within traditional Roman religious institutions. They memorized extensive scriptural passages, led prayer services, and provided spiritual guidance that established them as religious authorities independent of masculine approval. You witness the delicate negotiations that Christian conversion creates within traditional Roman marriages, where spiritual transformation forces couples to renegotiate fundamental assumptions about authority, duty, and the purpose of intimate relationships. Priscilla's husband struggles to understand why his wife now seeks divine guidance for decisions that Roman law places entirely under his control, creating domestic tension that reflects broader cultural conflicts between pagan and Christian worldviews. The afternoon brings a women's study group where Christian wives explore scriptures that offer radically different perspectives on feminine worth, marriage purpose, and spiritual destiny. They discover biblical passages that emphasize women's spiritual equality, celebrate female wisdom, and suggest that divine love transcends the social categories that define Roman life. The conversations blend theological exploration with practical discussions about implementing Christian principles within pagan household structures. The economic implications of Christian conversion prove particularly complex for Roman women whose new faith challenges fundamental assumptions about wealth, luxury, and social status. Priscilla begins redistributing her resources to support poor community members, choosing simple clothing over fashionable display, and prioritizing charitable giving over the accumulation that Roman culture equates with virtue. Her transformation creates economic ripple effects that extend throughout her social network. The most fascinating aspect of early Christian feminine experience is how it reframes intimate relationships around spiritual rather than social purposes. Marriage becomes a partnership in divine service rather than economic alliance. Sexuality is understood as sacred rather than merely procreational, and women's value is measured through spiritual development rather than reproductive success or household management efficiency. The evening's worship service reveals the emotional intensity that characterizes early Christian community life. Women share personal testimonies about spiritual transformation, pray for divine guidance in domestic difficulties, and support each other through the challenges of living Christian principles within pagan society. The gathering creates emotional intimacy that transcends traditional social boundaries while providing practical support for navigating cultural conflicts. You observe the complex relationship between Christian women and Roman legal traditions, where spiritual convictions sometimes conflict with civil obligations in ways that force difficult choices between religious conscience and social conformity. Priscilla must decide whether to participate in traditional religious festivals that her faith now considers idolatrous, whether to maintain friendships with women whose values she no longer shares, and how to raise children according to Christian principles within pagan educational systems. The night brings private prayer and meditation, where Priscilla grapples with the practical implications of spiritual transformation for every aspect of her daily life. Her conversion affects decisions about household management, child-rearing, social relationships, and marital intimacy in ways that create constant opportunities for either faithful living or comfortable compromise. The most revealing moments come when Priscilla encounters other Roman women who are curious about Christianity but terrified of its implications for their carefully constructed lives. They understand that religious conversion would require fundamental changes in priorities, relationships, and self-understanding that extend far beyond weekly worship attendance. The faith demands total transformation rather than convenient spiritual enhancement. As you observe these interactions, you realize that early Christianity represented both the ultimate expression of feminine spiritual empowerment and a new form of authority that could prove equally constraining. Women gained access to divine truth and moral leadership, while accepting spiritual disciplines that required renunciation of pleasures and privileges that Roman culture considered essential to feminine happiness. The sleeping Christian community holds the accumulated wisdom of spiritual revolution, new models of marriage that emphasize partnership over hierarchy, alternative concepts of feminine worth that transcend reproductive function, and religious practices that create authentic equality within structured faith communities. These women prove that the most profound social changes often begin with individual spiritual transformations that gradually reshape entire cultures. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the courage required to embrace religious convictions that challenge every assumption about proper feminine behavior, appropriate spiritual authority, and the purpose of intimate relationships. Early Christian women demonstrated that authentic transformation requires willingness to sacrifice comfortable familiarity for uncertain spiritual adventure, trading social acceptance for divine approval and conventional security for revolutionary faith. You find yourself standing in the marble halls of justice just as the morning light filters through columns that have witnessed countless legal battles, where the air carries the scent of old parchment mixed with the nervous perspiration of people who have discovered that the most effective rebellion sometimes involves nothing more dramatic than reading the fine print. Here, in chambers where words carry the weight of weapons and legal precedents can topple social conventions, you're about to witness the quiet revolution of Roman women who learned to transform patriarchal law into personal liberation through the simple expedient of understanding the rules better than the men who wrote them. The woman consulting with her legal advocate moves with the focused precision of someone who has discovered that freedom often hides in the spaces between legal definitions, waiting to be claimed by those clever enough to recognize opportunity, disguised as technicality. Valeria Messalina, not the infamous Empress, but a merchant's widow with an impressive collection of law scrolls and an even more impressive talent for finding loopholes, studies contract language with the intensity of someone preparing for intellectual warfare. You probably wouldn't have the legal stamina to memorize property statutes while simultaneously planning to subvert them, But Valeria approaches jurisprudence with a methodical determination of someone who has learned that the best way to escape a cage is to become an expert on door mechanisms. The mainstream historical fact that emerges as you observe the morning's legal consultation is both empowering and slightly amusing. Roman law, despite its theoretical restrictions on feminine autonomy, contained numerous loopholes, exceptions, and contradictory provisions that clever women could exploit to achieve practical independence that exceeded their official legal status. The same legal system that theoretically required women to have male guardians also provided mechanisms for circumventing, manipulating, or simply ignoring those restrictions. The consultation reveals the sophisticated legal strategies that Roman women developed to work around patriarchal limitations. Valeria discusses techniques for selecting compliant guardians, methods for transferring property through friendly intermediaries, and procedures for exploiting jurisdictional conflicts between different legal authorities. She's essentially operating a legal consulting practice that specializes in feminine constitutional rights 2 millennia before that becomes a recognized field of law. Historians still debate whether women's legal circumvention represented genuine systematic change or simply reflected individual exceptions that ultimately reinforced rather than challenged patriarchal authority. Some scholars argue that widespread legal manipulation created practical precedents that gradually expanded women's rights through custom and usage. Others suggest that individual success stories simply provided safety valves that prevented broader systemic reform while maintaining comfortable illusions of feminine empowerment. The little-known curiosity that becomes apparent as you examine Valeria's legal library is that Roman women often possessed more detailed knowledge of property law, inheritance regulations, and contract procedures than their male relatives, developing legal expertise through necessity that transformed them into informal attorneys for their entire social networks. They became specialists in the very laws designed to constrain them, using superior knowledge to achieve practical freedom through technical compliance. You witness the intricate process of guardian selection that reveals how women could transform legal restrictions into practical advantages. Valeria chooses elderly relatives, absent friends, or financially dependent clients as nominal guardians, creating arrangements where she provides guidance to the men who theoretically supervise her decisions. It's like appointing your pet goldfish as your financial advisor. Technically legal, but practically meaningless. The afternoon brings a property transaction that demonstrates the complex choreography required to navigate Roman women's legal status. Valeria purchases land through a series of intermediate sales, temporary transfers, and strategic partnerships that satisfy legal requirements while ensuring her actual control over the property. The paperwork resembles a financial shell game designed by someone with law degree and a twisted sense of humor. The economic realities of legal manipulation prove both liberating and exhausting. Valeria spends considerable time, energy, and money circumventing restrictions that shouldn't exist, creating parallel legal structures that duplicate services available to men through straightforward procedures. She's essentially paying premium prices for basic rights, which is either inspiring determination or expensive annoyance, depending on your tolerance for systematic discrimination. The most fascinating aspect of women's legal resistance is how it operates through collective knowledge, sharing rather than individual achievement. Valeria maintains correspondence with women across the empire who share information about successful legal strategies, reliable guardians, and friendly magistrates who interpret regulations favorably. They've created an informal legal network that operates like an underground railroad for feminine property rights. The evening brings a gathering of women who have achieved practical independence through legal manipulation, and their conversations reveal the psychological costs and benefits of living between official restriction and actual freedom. They discuss the exhaustion of constant legal vigilance, the satisfaction of outmaneuvering patriarchal systems, and the strange relationships they develop with laws that simultaneously constrain and liberate them. You observe the delicate balance these women must maintain between success and invisibility, between achievement and discretion. Valeria accumulates wealth and influence while maintaining the appearance of appropriate feminine submission, creating public personas that disguise private power. She's essentially living as a secret agent whose mission involves being successfully female in a world designed to prevent such success. The night's private planning session reveals the long-term strategies that women employ to create lasting change through accumulated legal precedents. Valeria documents her successful techniques, trains younger women in legal manipulation, and gradually builds case law that expands practical feminine rights through custom rather than legislation. She's conducting a slow-motion legal revolution that operates through patience rather than confrontation. The most revealing conversations occur when Valeria encounters women who choose compliance over resistance, preferring security within patriarchal protection to the uncertainty of independent legal maneuvering. These discussions illuminate the genuine risks and costs associated with legal rebellion, where success requires constant vigilance and failure can result in serious economic and social consequences. As you observe these interactions, you realize that Roman women's legal resistance represented both triumph and tragedy. Triumph in their ability to achieve practical freedom within constraining systems. Tragedy in the enormous effort required to claim rights that should have been automatically available. They proved that human ingenuity could overcome institutional oppression while simultaneously demonstrating the enormous waste involved in forcing people to circumvent rather than directly access basic freedoms. The sleeping city holds the accumulated wisdom of feminine legal rebellion, contracts that disguise revolution as compliance, property arrangements that transform restriction into opportunity, and social networks that create collective power through individual achievement. These women proved that law could be transformed through understanding rather than warfare, that systems could be changed through manipulation rather than destruction. You drift towards sleep, contemplating the extraordinary intellectual energy that Roman women devoted to achieving basic rights through legal complexity, recognizing both their remarkable success and the tragic necessity that made such effort required. Their stories illuminate the persistent human capacity to find freedom within oppression, to transform constraint into opportunity, and to achieve revolution through the quiet persistence of accumulated small victories. You find yourself standing at the edge of time itself, where the marble columns of ancient Rome begin to fade into the soft mist of memory, and the voices of women who lived 2,000 years ago whisper across centuries like gentle lullabies carrying truths that never grow old. The air around you shimmers with the accumulated wisdom of all the stories you've witnessed. The Vestal Virgins with their impossible vows, the wives who transformed political marriages into something resembling love, the mothers who risked death to bring life into the world, and the rebels who found freedom in the spaces between society's rules. As the evening light grows softer and more golden, you feel the presence of these women settling around you like warm silk, their experiences weaving together into a tapestry that reveals something profound about the eternal dance between restriction and liberation, between duty and desire, between the roles we're given and the lives we choose to create. Claudia and Julia and Livia and all the others seem to gather in this twilight space. Their faces no longer stressed by the daily negotiations of survival, but peaceful with the satisfaction of stories finally, fully told. The mainstream historical truth that emerges from all these individual tales is both comforting and challenging. Women throughout history have faced remarkably similar struggles with autonomy, intimacy, and identity, yet each generation finds its own creative solutions, its own paths to freedom, its own ways of transforming limitation into opportunity. The Roman women whose lives you've shared speak across centuries to modern experiences of balancing career and family, navigating relationship expectations, and claiming space for authentic self-expression. You realize that the questions these ancient women faced remain startlingly contemporary. How to maintain individual identity within committed relationships, how to find meaningful work within constraining systems, how to protect children while pursuing personal dreams, how to balance financial security with emotional fulfillment. Their struggles with marriage, motherhood, economic independence, and social expectations echo through time like familiar songs played in different keys. The little-known wisdom that becomes apparent as you reflect on their collective experience is that human nature itself provides the most reliable constant across cultural change. Love, ambition, creativity, and the desire for dignity persist regardless of legal restrictions or social conventions. The Roman matron who managed a household of 60 slaves faced fundamentally similar challenges to the modern executive managing corporate teams. Both require diplomacy, strategic thinking, and the ability to maintain authority while building consensus. Historians continue to debate the lessons we should draw from women's experiences in the ancient world, but perhaps the most important insight is simply this: human resilience, creativity, and adaptability have always found ways to flourish, even under the most constraining circumstances. Every generation believes its challenges are unique, yet the stories of Roman women reveal that the fundamental struggles between individual desire and social expectation remain remarkably consistent across time. The evening air grows cooler and more peaceful as you contemplate the courage these women showed in their daily lives. Not the dramatic courage of battlefield heroes, but the quiet persistence required to maintain dignity, protect loved ones, and create meaning within systems designed to limit possibility. They prove that revolution often happens through accumulated small choices rather than dramatic gestures, through personal transformation rather than public confrontation. You sense the profound interconnection between their stories and yours, recognizing that the freedoms you might take for granted were purchased through their patient resistance, their clever circumvention of restrictions, their willingness to risk comfort for conscience. The Roman woman who learned to read Greek in secret, who negotiated her own divorce settlement, who built financial independence through careful investment, who found love despite social prohibition. Each contributed to an ongoing conversation about human dignity that continues in every choice you make about your own life. The twilight deepens, and the boundaries between past and present seem to dissolve entirely. You understand that time isn't really linear but circular, that wisdom moves in spirals rather than straight lines, that the insights gained through struggle in one era become the foundation for progress in another. The Roman women's experiences offer both inspiration and perspective. Inspiration because they achieved so much despite enormous obstacles. Perspective because their struggles remind us that current challenges, however difficult, are neither unprecedented nor insurmountable. As the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky, you feel a profound sense of gratitude for these women who refuse to accept limitation as final, who found ways to love authentically despite social convention, who protected their children and built their communities and created beauty and meaning in a world that often seemed designed to prevent such achievements. Their legacy lives not in monuments or official histories, but in the continuing human capacity to transform constraint into creativity, restriction into resilience. The night settles completely now, soft and welcoming, carrying with it the accumulated piece of stories shared and wisdom transmitted. You realize that the most important lesson these Roman women offer isn't about ancient history, but about timeless possibility. The understanding that every era's limitations are also invitations to innovation, that every constraint contains within it the seeds of its own transcendence. The human creativity and connection persist regardless of external circumstances. Their voices fade gradually into the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, becoming part of the quiet symphony of night sounds that includes rustling leaves, distant water, and the soft pulse of your own heartbeat. The wisdom they've shared becomes woven into your dreams, where their courage transforms into your own possibilities, where their love becomes a foundation for your own relationships, where their struggles illuminate pathways toward your own freedom. Sleep comes gently, carrying with it the comfort of knowing that you're part of an ongoing story that began long before you were born and will continue long after you're gone. A story about the persistent human capacity to find light in darkness, love in limitation, and hope in the most challenging circumstances. The Roman women's legacy lives on in every choice to prioritize authenticity over approval, connection over convention, and courage over comfort. Rest peacefully now, knowing that their wisdom travels with you into tomorrow, that their strength supports your own journey, and that their love for life, for freedom, and for each other continues to ripple outward through time, touching every heart that remains open to the possibility that things can always, somehow, become more beautiful, more just, and more filled with the quiet revolution of human dignity, choosing to flourish regardless of circumstance. The eternal questions they faced about love and duty, freedom and security, individual dreams and collective responsibility. These questions remain eternally fresh, eternally important, eternally capable of generating new answers as long as human hearts continue to beat with hope and determination and the unshakable conviction that every life matters, every story deserves to be told, and every person deserves the chance to write their own ending. Sweet dreams carry forward their courage into your own tomorrow.